They told him it was over. They told him to walk away and never look back. But Officer Jack Reynolds knew something they didn't. He knew that the only witness to the crime that destroyed his life wasn't a person. It was a dog. When a wrongfully convicted cop fell to his knees in the pouring rain begging for one last moment with his canine partner, everyone thought it was a pathetic act of desperation. They thought he was broken. They were wrong. What happened next wasn't a goodbye. It was a revelation that would silence the entire police force and bring a corrupt lieutenant to his knees. This is the story of a bond that not even prison bars could break and a secret hidden where no one thought to look. The rain that afternoon was relentless. It wasn't just falling. It was hammering against the asphalt of the county courthouse loading dock, drowning out the distant hum of the city Jack Reynolds had sworn to protect for 30 years. The sky was a bruised purple heavy and suffocating, matching the feeling in Jack's chest. Every drop that hit his face felt like ice, but he barely noticed the cold. He only felt the weight, the heavy dragging weight of the steel shackles around his ankles and the bite of the handcuffs digging into his wrists. Two large corrections officers flanked him, their grips on his upper arms tight enough to leave bruises. They were young, probably rookies who had grown up hearing stories about the legendary Jack Reynolds, the man who had cleaned up the streets when no one else would. Now they were dragging him toward a reinforced transport van like he was common trash. Jack didn't fight them. He didn't try to pull away or shout about his innocence. He had done that for 6 months. He had screamed it in interrogation rooms, whispered it to his lawyer, and stated it calmly to a jury that refused to look him in the eye. It hadn't mattered. The evidence was planted too perfectly, the lies woven too tight. To the world, he was just another dirty cop who got caught with his hand in the cookie jar. But as the heavy metal doors of the transport van loomed ahead, Jack stopped. His boots, worn and scuffed from years of patrol, slid in the slick mud gathering near the drainage grates. He dug his heels in, locking his knees. The sudden stop jerked the guards back, and for a second, the only sound was the violent clanking of chains echoing off the brick walls. "Keep moving!" Reynolds, one of the guards, barked, shoving him forward. "It is over." Jack didn't move. He twisted his body, straining against the metal links, turning his head frantically toward the far end of the lot. There, parked in the shadows of the overhang, sat a black K9 unit SUV. It was his SUV, or it used to be. The engine was off. The lights were dark, but Jack knew. He could feel it in his gut, a phantom pull that had guided him through dark warehouses and across dangerous alleys for the last 7 years. "He is in there," Jack said, his voice raspy from days of silence. "I know he is in there." The guards exchanged a look of annoyance mixed with pity. One of them sighed, tightening his grip on Jack's shoulder. "Look, Jack, do not make this harder than it has to be. You are going to state. The dog is property of the department now. It is out of your hands." Property. The word hit Jack like a physical blow. Atlas wasn't property. Atlas was the reason Jack was still alive. Atlas was the only partner who hadn't turned his back when the accusations started flying. Jack remembered the night of the raid, the confusion, the shouting, and the way Atlas had stood over him when he was forced to the ground, snarling at the very officers they worked with every day. They had dragged the dog away that night, sedated him, and thrown him in a cage. Jack hadn't seen him since. 6 months of silence. 6 months of wondering if his best friend thought he had abandoned him. "I am not asking for a pardon," Jack said, the rain streaming down his face, mixing with the grit and grime of the holding cell. "I am not asking for mercy. I just want to see him. Just for a second. Please." The desperation in his voice was raw, stripping away the tough exterior of the veteran cop. He wasn't Officer Reynolds anymore. He was just a man about to lose the last thing that tethered him to humanity. He pulled against the chains again, his eyes locked on the dark-tinted windows of the SUV. He imagined Atlas inside, pacing the small cage, confused, waiting for the familiar sound of Jack's boots. The thought of Atlas waiting for a reunion that would never happen tore Jack apart more than the prison sentence ever could. The guards yanked him harder this time, their patience wearing thin. The chains rattled violently, a discordant symphony of captivity. Jack stumbled his knees, hitting the wet asphalt, but he kept his eyes on the vehicle. He needed a sign, a bark, a shadow. Anything to let him know that Atlas was still fighting, still there. But the SUV remained silent, a steel coffin sitting in the rain. And in that silence, Jack felt the crushing weight of his reality. He wasn't just losing his freedom, he was losing his soul. Then the sound of expensive leather shoes crunching on wet gravel cut through the noise of the storm. A black umbrella opened with a sharp snap, shielding a man in a perfectly tailored suit from the deluge. Lieutenant Greg Carter stepped out from the shelter of the courthouse overhang, a smug, tight smile playing on his lips. He didn't look like a cop who had just spent hours testifying in a high-stakes trial. He looked like a man who had just won the lottery. Carter stopped a few feet away, careful not to let the mud splatter his polished shoes. He looked down at Jack, who was struggling to regain his footing in the muck. The contrast was sickening. Carter, the rising star with the silver tongue and the political connections, and Jack, the old warhorse now broken and bound. "Well," Jack Carter said, his voice smooth and carrying easily over the rain, "it looks like this is the end of the road. I have to say you look good in orange. It suits you better than the badge ever did." Jack glared at him, water dripping from his nose. "You set me up, Greg. You know it. I know it. And one day everyone else will know it too." Carter chuckled a dry, humorless sound. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He tapped it against his palm, his eyes gleaming with malice. "Keep telling yourself that, old man. Maybe it will help you sleep in your cell, but honestly, nobody cares about the truth. They care about the win, and I won." He took a step closer, lowering the umbrella just enough so Jack could see the cruelty in his eyes. "But I did not come out here to gloat. I came to handle a bit of administrative cleanup." He held up the paper. It was a departmental order stamped with the official seal. Jack squinted through the rain, reading the bold letters at the top. "Asset Disposal Authorization." His blood ran cold. "What is that?" Jack asked, his voice trembling. Carter smiled, enjoying the moment. This is for your mutt, Atlas." Jack tried to lunge, but the chains held him back, jerking him violently. "What are you doing to him?" Carter shrugged, feigning indifference. "He is a liability, Jack. Since you were arrested, he has been unmanageable. Aggressive, dangerous. No handler can get near him. He sits in his kennel and growls at the wall. The vet says he is mentally unstable. Irreparable trauma." He sighed, shaking his head with mock sadness. "We cannot keep a broken weapon on the force. It is a safety hazard." Jack felt the air leave his lungs. "No, you cannot. He is not broken. He is loyal. He just needs me." Carter tapped the paper again. "That is the problem, Jack. He needs you, and you are gone. So I just signed the order. As soon as your transport leaves the lot, Atlas is going to be transported to the veterinary clinic down the street. Euthanasia is scheduled for 4 o'clock. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. 4 o'clock. That was less than an hour away. They were going to kill him. They were going to put a needle in Atlas's vein and stop his heart simply because he was too loyal to the man they framed. Jack stared at Carter, horror washing over him. It wasn't just about getting rid of a dangerous dog. Jack realized with sickening clarity that Carter wanted Atlas dead because Atlas was there that night. Atlas had tracked the scent. Atlas had growled at Carter at the crime scene before anyone else suspected a thing. The dog knew. And Carter was cleaning up loose ends. "You son of a bitch!" Jack roared, struggling against the guards with renewed fury. "He is innocent. He is a hero. You cannot just kill him." Carter's smile vanished, replaced by a cold, hard sneer. "I can, and I did. It is done. Now get him out of here. I am tired of getting wet." He turned to walk away, dismissing Jack like he was nothing more than a nuisance. The guards grabbed Jack's arms, hauling him up, dragging him toward the prison van. The wheels of justice were turning, crushing everything Jack loved. "Stop!" Jack screamed, his voice cracking, tearing from his throat. "Please, Greg, stop!" He did something then that he had never done in his life. He stopped fighting the chains. He stopped fighting the guards. He let his legs give out, completely dropping his full weight into the mud. The splash covered his uniform, cold slime seeping through the fabric. He didn't care. He curled forward, his forehead touching the wet asphalt, humiliating himself in front of the rookie guards, in front of the courthouse staff watching from the windows, in front of the man who ruined his life. "I am begging you." Jack sobbed, the sound guttural and broken. "I am begging you, Lieutenant. Do not kill him without letting me say goodbye. He is scared. He is alone. If he dies thinking I abandoned him, I cannot live with that. Please, just give me 1 minute. 1 minute to tell him he is a good boy. Then you can do whatever you want of me. The silence that followed was heavy. The only sound was Jack's ragged breathing and the rain hitting the pavement. Carter stopped. He turned back slowly, looking down at the man groveling in the dirt. For a second, Jack hoped he saw a flicker of humanity, but then Carter smirked. It is pathetic, Jack. Truly. Jack kept his head down, tears mixing with the dirty water pooling around his face. Please, just let me see him. Carter checked his watch, sighing theatrically. He looked around, seeing the eyes of the other officers on him. He knew he had to play the part of the strict but lawful commander. Denying a dying wish even for a dog might look bad in the report. Fine, Carter spat, but not because you begged, because I want you to see what you did to him. I want you to see the monster you created before we put him down. He signaled to a uniformed officer standing near the black SUV. Bring the beast out, but keep him muzzled and double chained. If he so much as sneezes wrong, I will shoot him right here in the lot. Jack lifted his head, mud smearing his cheek. Hope, fragile and terrifying, flared in his chest. He was going to see him. Just then, a sharp voice cut through the rain, colder than the wind. Hold it! Jack froze. Carter spun around, annoyed. From the shadows of the loading dock entrance, a woman stepped forward. She wore a trench coat belted tight, her heels clicking rhythmically on the concrete. Her face was sharp, her eyes hidden behind dark glasses, despite the gloom. Sarah Jenkins from Internal Affairs. She didn't look at Jack. Her gaze was fixed on Carter. Procedure Lieutenant Sarah said, her voice flat and devoid of emotion. You are authorizing the disposal of a K-9 unit asset. According to Section 402 of the Department bylaws, the handler must be granted a wellness check if requested before termination to ensure the animal's aggression isn't due to medical neglect. It is not a favor. It is the law. Carter bristled, his jaw tightening. This man is a convict, Sarah. He has no rights. He is still the handler of record until the dog is deceased. Sarah countered, stepping into the rain without opening an umbrella. Unless you want Internal Affairs to open an inquiry into why you rushed the procedure and violated protocol, I am sure your promotion hearing next week would love that paperwork. The threat was subtle, but razor sharp. Carter knew Sarah. She was a machine. She didn't care about justice or mercy. She cared about the rule book. If she found a comma out of place, she would bury him. Carter glared at her, then spat on the ground. Fine. You want to follow the book? Let's follow the book. He turned back to the officer by the SUV, his face twisted in anger. Open the door. Bring the dog out. He looked down at Jack, his eyes narrowing into slits. You have got 60 seconds, Reynolds. 1 minute. And Sarah, you better have your weapon drawn, because if that dog snaps, I'm not waiting for a vet. I will put a bullet in his brain myself. Sarah didn't flinch. She nodded to the guards holding Jack. Step back, give him 5 feet, but keep the leg irons locked. The guards retreated slightly, leaving Jack kneeling alone in the center of the lot. The rain seemed to intensify, washing the mud from his face. He turned his body toward the black SUV, his heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. The officer at the SUV reached for the handle. The vehicle shook. A deep, thunderous bark erupted from inside, muffled by the steel, but still terrifying in its ferocity. The car rocked on its suspension. Whatever was inside that cage wasn't just a dog. It was a hurricane of fury and confusion. Jack swallowed hard. He braced himself. Open it, he whispered. The officer yanked the door open and jumped back. For a heartbeat, there was nothing but the dark cavern of the cargo area. Then with a sound like tearing metal, a creature launched itself into the light. Atlas. He hit the end of the heavy chains held by 2 struggling handlers, snapping them taut with a force that nearly pulled the men off their feet. He was massive, a dark sable German shepherd, with eyes that burned like embers. But he looked terrible. His ribs were showing through his wet fur. His muzzle was graying from stress. A heavy leather muzzle was strapped tight around his snout, digging into his skin, and a thick metal prong collar pinched his neck. He wasn't barking anymore. He was screaming a high-pitched, frustrated sound of pure distress. He thrashed against the leads, spinning, snapping at the air, his claws scrabbling frantically on the wet pavement. He looked insane, a wild animal that had forgotten everything but rage. Shoot him! Carter shouted, his hand going to his holster. He is out of control. No, Jack screamed. He threw his hands up, ignoring the cuffs. Atlas. The sound of his name cut through the chaos. The dog froze mid-lunge. His ears, which had been flattened against his skull, pricked up. He spun around, his wild eyes scanning the lot, searching through the rain and the legs of the officers. Atlas. Jack called again, his voice breaking. Hey, buddy, I am here. The dog's gaze locked onto Jack. For a second, the beast vanished. The tension drained from his body. He lowered his head and a soft, heartbreaking whine escaped the muzzle. He didn't lunge. He didn't attack. He simply collapsed onto his belly and began to crawl. He dragged the two handlers with him, ignoring their shouts. He crawled through the mud, his belly scraping the asphalt, his eyes fixed on Jack like he was the only source of light in the universe. Let him go, Sarah ordered the handlers. They hesitated, then dropped the leads. Atlas scrambled the last few feet and buried his muzzled face into Jack's chest. The force of it knocked the wind out of Jack, but he wrapped his arms around the wet, shivering body, burying his face in the dog's neck. I am sorry, Jack wept, rocking back and forth. I am so sorry I left you. Atlas pushed harder, making desperate, muffled sounds against Jack's throat. He was shivering violently, soaking Jack's prison jumpsuit. But then Jack felt something. It wasn't just affection. Atlas wasn't just hugging him. The dog was pushing. He was nudging his hard plastic muzzle frantically into the pocket of Jack's shirt, the pocket where Jack used to keep training treats. But there were no treats there. Jack pulled back slightly, looking into the dog's eyes. They weren't just sad. They were intense, urgent. Atlas whined again, then turned his head and growled a low guttural vibration that shook Jack's chest. He wasn't growling at Jack. He was looking past him. Jack followed the dog's gaze. Atlas was staring directly at Lieutenant Carter. The hair on Atlas's hackles stood up in a rigid line. He let out a sharp, muffled bark, then looked back at Jack, then back at Carter. He nudged Jack's chin, then nudged his pocket again. A jolt of electricity ran through Jack's mind. This wasn't a goodbye. Atlas wasn't trying to be comforted. He was trying to tell them something. He was trying to work. Jack's hand trembled as he stroked the dog's side. He felt the ribs, the tension, and then his hand brushed against the collar. It wasn't Atlas's normal collar. It was a cheap, temporary kennel loop. Where is your collar? Jack whispered, his mind racing. The tactical collar, the wide leather one with the hidden GPS pocket. Jack had taken it off him the night of the raid, seconds before they cuffed him. He had thrown it into the corner of the garage, hoping to hide it because it contained the SD card from his body mic. But the police report said they never found it. Atlas nudged him again harder. Then he looked at Carter's car. A sleek silver sports car parked just 10 yards away, gleaming under the floodlights. Atlas barked at the car. Jack looked at Carter. The lieutenant was checking his watch, bored, but then Jack saw it. Carter was holding a keychain, and on that keychain, dangling casually, was a small, distinct piece of braided leather. A piece of a tag. It wasn't a keychain. It was a trophy. Jack's breath hitched. Carter had the collar. He must have taken it that night as a souvenir of his victory over Jack, and if he had the collar, he had the recording. Atlas knew. He could smell it. He smelled his own collar, his own scent coming from Carter's car. Jack looked at Sarah. She was watching Atlas closely, her brow furrowed behind her sunglasses. She saw it too. She saw the alert behavior. 1 minute is up, Carter shouted, stepping forward. Get the dog. Jack looked at Atlas. The dog's eyes were burning with focus. He wasn't a pet. He was a partner, and he was waiting for a command. Jack leaned down, his lips brushing the dog's velvety ear. He took a breath, inhaling the smell of wet fur and rain. He didn't say goodbye. He whispered the one word that could either save them or get them both killed. Such verloren, Jack breathed. Seek the lost. Atlas's muscles turned to stone, and then he exploded. The heavy metal latch of the K9 transport van clicked open with a sound like a gunshot echoing through the rain-swept parking lot. For a split second, there was a vacuum of silence, a heavy pause, where the only sound was the drumming of water on the roof of the vehicle. Then the door swung wide and the darkness inside the cargo hold seemed to explode. A black and sable blur launched itself into the gray afternoon light with enough force to rock the entire chassis of the heavy SUV. The sound that tore from the animal's throat wasn't a bark. It was a scream of pure, unadulterated fury, muffled only slightly by the thick leather agitation muzzle strapped brutally tight around his snout. Two handlers, large men in tactical gear, who looked like they spent their lives in the gym, were yanked forward violently, their boots skidding across the wet asphalt as they fought to maintain their grip on the twin lead chains attached to the dog's collar. This was not a pet. This was a weapon of war that had been left to rust and go mad in solitary confinement. Atlas hit the end of the chains with a sickening crack of metal snapping taut, his body twisted in mid-air, muscles coiling and releasing in spasms of rage. He was a terrifying sight. The once magnificent German shepherd whose coat used to gleam like polished obsidian was now a shadow of his former self. His fur was matted and dull, clinging to a frame that had wasted away from weeks of pacing and refusing food. His ribs jutted out like the bars of a cage beneath his skin, and his hip bones were sharp angles against the rain-soaked hide. But it was his eyes that made the seasoned corrections officers step back in genuine fear. They were bloodshot, rimmed with raw red skin and burning with a frantic, chaotic light. There was no recognition in them, only the wild, desperate instinct of a creature backed into a corner. He snapped his jaws inside the muzzle, the plastic clicking against his teeth as he thrashed, trying to bite the very air around him. "Control him!" Carter shouted, stepping back quickly, his polished shoes splashing in a puddle as he retreated to the safety of the loading dock overhang. "Do not let him get loose." The handlers were struggling. One of them cursed loudly as Atlas spun around, tangling the heavy chain around the man's leg before lurching in the opposite direction. They weren't using standard leashes. They were using catch poles, long rigid metal rods with wire loops tightened around the dog's neck, usually reserved for capturing rabid wildlife or dangerous strays. The wire dug into Atlas's neck fur, choking him, but he didn't seem to care. He fought against the pressure, throwing his weight around like a wrecking ball. "He is too strong," one handler yelled, gritting his teeth as he leaned back, trying to use his body weight to anchor the thrashing animal. "He is going to snap the pole." Jack watched from his knees in the mud, his heart shattering into 1,000 pieces. This wasn't the disciplined partner he had raised since puppyhood. This wasn't the dog who would sit motionless for hours on a stakeout or gently nudge a crying child during a domestic call. This was a creature in agony. The department had broken him. They had taken a highly intelligent, sensitive soul and locked him in a concrete box for 6 months, depriving him of his work, his pack, and his purpose. Atlas. Jack whispered the name, getting lost in the noise of the storm and the dog snarling. Atlas lunged again, this time toward the line of guards standing near the prison transport bus, the guards' flinched hands flying to their batons. The dog was a whirlwind of teeth and claws, a demon unleashed. He slammed into the side of the van, the impact audible over the rain, then rebounded instantly, ready to strike again. He was fighting everyone and everything, looking for a target for his pain. "Shoot it!" Carter yelled, his voice high and panicked. "I said shoot the damn thing if you cannot hold it." A guard raised a rifle, leveling it at the thrashing dog. "No!" Jack screamed, the sound tearing from the bottom of his lungs. He lunged forward, the chains on his ankles pulling him down face first into the slush. He scrambled up, ignoring the pain, ignoring the mud coating his eyes and mouth. "Atlas!" The shout pierced through the chaos, sharp and commanding. It was the voice of the Alpha, the voice of the only human being who mattered. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. Atlas froze mid-air, landing on his paws with a heavy splash. His head whipped around, ears swiveling like radar dishes. The frantic thrashing stopped. The growling died in his throat. He stood perfectly still, his chest heaving, his breath coming in ragged gasps through the muzzle vents. He scanned the lot, his eyes darting frantically past the legs of the officers, past the tires of the van, searching. Then he saw him. Jack was on his knees 20 feet away, arms spread wide despite the handcuffs, chains dangling from his wrists. He looked like a wreck, broken and dirty, but to Atlas, he was the sun breaking through the clouds. The change in the dog was heartbreaking. The monster vanished. The wild red-rimmed eyes softened, filling with a sudden, overwhelming recognition. His ears, which had been pinned back in aggression, flicked forward in confusion and then dropped low in submission. A sound escaped the dog, a high-pitched, broken whimper that sounded more like a crying child than an animal. It was a sound of pure relief mixed with an agonizing sorrow. Atlas lowered his body until his belly touched the wet asphalt. He didn't run. He didn't leap. He began to crawl. He ignored the catch poles still tight around his neck. He ignored the handlers who were now standing slack-jawed in shock. He pulled himself forward through the mud, his paws scraping the ground, his eyes locked onto Jack's face with an intensity that made the rest of the world disappear. He looked like a penitent pilgrim dragging himself toward a shrine. "Let him go," Sarah Jenkins ordered, her voice cutting through the stunned silence of the lot. "Drop the poles." The handlers looked at her, then at the crawling dog. They hesitated for a fraction of a second before clicking the release mechanisms. The wire loops slackened and fell away. Atlas didn't surge forward to attack. He simply increased his pace, scrambling the last few feet with desperate clumsiness. He reached Jack and collapsed, his heavy head slamming into Jack's chest with enough force to knock the breath out of him. Jack wrapped his arms around the wet, shivering body, burying his face in the coarse fur of the dog's neck. He smelled like kennel cleaner and wet dog and neglect, but to Jack it was the best smell in the world. He felt the dog's heart hammering against his own, a frantic staccato rhythm that matched his own pulse. "I am here, buddy." Jack sobbed, his tears mixing with the rain soaking into Atlas's fur. "I am right here. I did not leave you. I promise I did not leave you." Atlas pushed harder against him, letting out long, trembling moans. He tried to lick Jack's face, but the hard plastic muzzle blocked him. Frustrated, he rubbed the side of his face against Jack's cheek, scraping his skin. But Jack didn't flinch. The dog was shivering violently, his entire body vibrating with the release of 6 months of stored-up stress. For a moment, there was no prison sentence. There was no corrupt lieutenant. There was no rain. There was just a man and his dog reunited in the mud. The bond between them was palpable, a physical force that seemed to push the watching officers back, creating a private circle of grief and love. Even the rookie guards looked away uncomfortable, witnessing something so raw and intimate. But then the moment shifted. Jack felt it first. It wasn't just affection. Atlas wasn't just seeking comfort. The dog was doing something else. He was pushing. He was nudging his muzzle insistently into the front of Jack's uniform, right against the breast pocket where Jack used to keep his training log and treats. Jack pulled back slightly, wiping the mud from his eyes to look at his partner. Atlas wasn't looking at him anymore. The dog had pulled his head back, his ears pricked and swiveling. His nose was working overtime, sniffing the air with short, sharp inhalations. The whimper was gone, replaced by a low, vibrating rumble in his chest. Atlas turned his head slowly, deliberately, until his gaze bypassed the guards, bypassed Sarah, and locked onto the figure standing under the overhang. He was staring directly at Lieutenant Carter. The fur along Atlas's spine, which had smoothed down during the hug, began to rise again, standing up in a rigid ridge of hackles. His body went stiff in Jack's arms. He didn't lunge, but the intensity of his focus was terrifying. He let out a sharp, muffled bark, not a bark of aggression, but a bark of alert. It was the specific sound he used when he found something, when he found evidence. Jack frowned a confusion, warring with instinct. He placed his hands on the dog's sides, feeling the tension coiling under the skin. "What is it?" Jack whispered. "What do you see?" Atlas nudged Jack's pocket again, then looked back at Carter, then back at the pocket. The movement was precise, deliberate. He was trying to bridge a gap, trying to communicate a concept. Jack looked at Carter. The lieutenant was checking his expensive watch, looking bored and annoyed by the display of emotion. He adjusted his suit jacket, and as he did, something jingled. He was holding a set of keys, and dangling from that key ring was a small piece of braided leather with a brass tag. Jack's breath hitched in his throat. He recognized that leather. It was a piece of Atlas's old tactical collar, the one Jack had thrown away the night of the arrest, the one that was supposed to be lost. Carter had it. He had kept it as a trophy, and Atlas knew. Atlas could smell his own scent on the man who had ordered his death. But more than that, Atlas was signaling. He wasn't just reacting to the collar. He was reacting to what was inside it. The realization hit Jack like a bolt of lightning. The recording. The evidence. It wasn't lost. It was right there, dangling from the enemy's hand. Jack looked down at Atlas. The dog looked back, his amber eyes burning with intelligence and a question. He was waiting for this command. He was ready to work one last time. As Jack pressed his face into the wet, coarse fur of the dog's neck, the world around him began to dissolve. The cold, biting rain of the courthouse parking lot faded away, replaced by a different kind of dampness, a humid, suffocating mist that smelled of saltwater, diesel fuel, and impending violence. The rattling of the chains on his wrists transformed into the rhythmic metallic clinking of tactical gear and the heavy thud of combat boots hitting wet concrete. Time warped. The gray sky of the prison transport lot twisted and darkened until it was the pitch-black ceiling of a night storm over the docks 6 months ago. He wasn't a prisoner anymore. He was Officer Jack Reynolds, lead handler of the K-9 unit, and he was standing at the threshold of hell. It was the night of the harbor raid, the night everything changed. The target was a sprawling, rusted warehouse complex on the edge of the industrial district, a place that smelled of rotting fish and old oil. Intelligence said it was a distribution hub for a major cartel, but intelligence hadn't prepared them for the fortress they were about to breach. The rain was falling just as hard that night, sideways sheets of water that turned the world into a blur of gray and black. Jack crouched behind the armored wheel of the SWAT Bear Cat, his hand resting on Atlas's tactical harness. The dog was vibrating. Not with fear, never with fear, but with a high-frequency anticipation that hummed through the leather lead like an electric current. Atlas knew the job. He knew the difference between a training exercise and the real thing. He could smell the adrenaline spiking off the men around him, the sharp metallic tang of weapons being racked, and the heavy ozone scent of the coming storm. Move up, the radio crackled in Jack's earpiece. Breach in 3, 2, 1. The explosion that blew the warehouse doors off their hinges was deafening, a concussive wave that rattled Jack's teeth. Flashbangs popped in blinding white bursts, turning the interior of the cavernous building into a strobe-lit nightmare. Go, go, go. Jack moved. He didn't run, he flowed, a practiced, tactical advance that he and Atlas had perfected over 7 years of service. They were a single organism. Jack was the mind, and Atlas was the teeth. They swept into the smoke-filled interior, moving through the fatal funnel of the doorway and into the chaos beyond. Gunfire erupted immediately. It was a deafening cacophony of automatic weapons fire echoing off the corrugated metal walls. Bullets sparked against the steel beams overhead, raining hot metal down on the assault team. Jack dropped to a knee behind a stack of shipping pallets, tightening his grip on the lead. Atlas down. Jack commanded, his voice calm amidst the madness. The dog dropped instantly, pressing his belly to the dirty concrete, his amber eyes scanning the darkness ahead. He wasn't barking. He was silent, intense, waiting for the signal to engage. Jack watched the dog's ears. Even in the roar of the firefight, Atlas was listening, tracking the movement of the hostiles in the shadows. His head snapped to the left, tracking a runner that Jack couldn't even see yet. Contact left, Jack shouted, alerting the entry team. A second later, a gunman popped out from behind a forklift, raising an AK-47. The team was ready, thanks to the dog. 2 controlled shots rang out, and the threat dropped. That was how they worked. Atlas was the radar, the early warning system that kept them all alive. They moved deeper into the facility, clearing room after room. The air grew thick with smoke and dust. Jack's heart was hammering a steady rhythm against his ribs, but his hands were steady. He trusted his team, and more importantly, he trusted his dog. Greg Carter was there too. Back then, he wasn't a lieutenant in a tailored suit. He was the squad leader, a sergeant with ambition burning in his eyes brighter than his tactical light. He moved with a reckless aggression that always made Jack uneasy. Carter wanted the glory. He wanted the bust. He wanted the headline. Clear Carter shouted, his voice echoing from the upper catwalk. The shooting stopped as abruptly as it had begun. The silence that followed was heavy ringing in their ears. The air was still thick with the acrid smell of cordite and the copper scent of blood. Jack stood up, signaling Atlas to heel. The dog trotted to his side, panting softly, his tongue lolling out, but his eyes remained sharp, scanning the corners for any lingering threats. Secure the perimeter, Carter ordered, his voice tight with adrenaline. Reynolds, sweep the back offices. Intel says the stash is here somewhere. Jack nodded. Seek, he whispered to Atlas. The dog lowered his nose to the ground and began to work. The switch from combat mode to detection mode was seamless. Atlas moved with a fluid grace, weaving through the debris, sniffing the air, sniffing the floor, sniffing the seams of the walls. He wasn't looking for explosives this time. He was looking for cash. Large amounts of currency carried a specific scent, a mix of ink cotton and the distinct chemical residue of the cocaine it was usually bundled with. They moved into the rear of the warehouse, a maze of small offices and storage lockers. The lighting here was poor, flickering fluorescent strips that buzzed like angry hornets. Jack swept his flashlight beam across the peeling paint and water-stained ceilings. It looked like a dump, a dead end, but Atlas didn't think so. The dog stopped in front of a heavy metal shelving unit pushed against the far wall. He stiffened. His tail, which had been swaying with the rhythm of the search, went rigid. He took a deep breath, tasting the air, then another. Here Jack asked, watching the dog's body language closely. Atlas sat. It was the passive indication. He wasn't scratching, he wasn't barking. He was sitting statue still, staring intently at the wall behind the shelves. He had found it. Jack signaled the team. I have an alert here. Two officers rushed over, helping Jack drag the heavy steel shelves away from the wall. Behind it, the drywall looked seamless, dusty, and neglected. But Atlas hadn't moved. He was still sitting, his gaze locked on a specific panel. Jack tapped the wall with the butt of his flashlight. It sounded hollow. He pulled a crowbar from his belt and jammed it into the seam. With a grunt of effort, he leveraged the tool and pulled. The drywall cracked and groaned, then gave way, revealing that it was actually a cleverly disguised plywood door painted to match the surrounding wall. Jack shone his light into the cavity beyond. The beam illuminated stacks, floor-to-ceiling stacks. It wasn't drugs, it was money. It was vacuum-sealed bricks of U.S. currency wrapped in clear plastic stacked like firewood in a space no bigger than a walk-in closet. Millions. It had to be millions. The green ink seemed to glow under the harsh LED light of the tactical flashlight. Jack let out a low whistle. Jackpot. Good work, buddy, Jack murmured, reaching down to scratch Atlas behind the ears. The dog wagged his tail once, acknowledging the praise, but kept his eyes on the prize. He knew he had done well. That was when Carter appeared. He came around the corner, sliding on the slick concrete, his eyes wide. He pushed past the other officers, shoving his way to the front. When he saw the money, his face changed. The professional mask of the police sergeant slipped, and for a second Jack saw something else. Naked greed. Clear the room. Carter ordered, his voice cracking slightly. I want a perimeter set up outside. Nobody comes in or out until the feds get here. Reynolds, take the dog and sweep the perimeter. Make sure we miss nothing. It was a standard order, but the tone was wrong. It was too urgent, too dismissive. Jack hesitated. Sir, we should log this first. Standard of procedure is to photograph the find before we break visual contact. Just do as you are told, Reynolds. Carter snapped, turning his back on Jack to stare at the money. I will secure the scene. Get the dog out. Jack frowned. His gut instinct, the same instinct that had kept him alive on the streets for 30 years, twitched. Something was off. But an order was an order. He tugged on Atlas's lead. Come on, Atlas. They turned to leave, walking back toward the main warehouse floor, but they didn't go far. A sudden crash from the loading bay distracted the other officers, sending them running toward the front of the building. For a brief window of time, the back hallway was empty except for Jack, Atlas, and Carter, who was still standing in front of the open wall cache. Jack stopped. He didn't know why. Maybe it was the silence. Maybe it was the way Atlas had stalled, resisting the leash. The dog had turned his head, looking back toward the room they had just left. Atlas let out a low, rumbling growl. It wasn't the alert bark. It was a threat growl, a sound reserved for bad guys. Jack turned around, stepping quietly back into the shadow of the doorway. He looked into the room. Carter was standing in front of the wall of money. He wasn't securing the scene. He wasn't radioing command. He was reaching into the wall. Jack watched in disbelief as his superior officer grabbed a thick brick of vacuum-sealed cash. It was easily $50,000 in one bundle. Carter didn't catalog it. He didn't place it in an evidence bag. With a quick, fluid motion, practiced and desperate, he shoved the brick of cash inside his tactical vest, pushing it deep into the trauma plate pocket. He patted the vest, smoothing it down, then reached for another. Jack stood frozen. The corruption was happening right in front of him. A cop stealing from a crime scene. It was the cardinal sin, the betrayal of the badge. Atlas saw it too, but the dog didn't understand the concept of money. He didn't understand greed. What Atlas understood was body language. He understood pheromones. When Carter stole that money, his scent changed. The spike of adrenaline, the sour sweat of guilt, the sharp tang of deceit. To a dog with a nose that could detect cancer cells or a drop of blood in a gallon of water, the change in Carter's chemistry was as loud as a siren. Atlas lunged. He hit the end of the leash with a snap, barking a ferocious, aggressive roar that echoed off the concrete walls. It wasn't a warning, it was a challenge. He was marking the enemy. Carter spun around, guilt written all over his sweating face. His hand was still half inside his vest. He saw Jack standing in the shadows. He saw the dog straining against the lead teeth, bared eyes locked on his chest where the money was hidden. For a second, time seemed to stop. The rain pounded on the roof above them. The distant sirens wailed, but in that hallway there was only the three of them: the thief, the witness, and the dog who knew the truth. Reynolds Carter's voice was a hiss, dangerous and low. "Control your animal." Jack stepped into the light, his hand resting on his holster, not drawing but ready. "Put it back, Greg." Carter froze. His eyes darted from Jack to the dog, then back to Jack. He licked his lips. "Put what back?" "I saw you," Jack said, his voice steady despite the pounding of his heart. "I saw you take the money. Put it back and we can pretend this did not happen. You are tired. You are not thinking straight. Just put it back." It was an olive branch, a chance to walk away. Jack didn't want to destroy a fellow officer. He just wanted to do the right thing. Carter stared at him, and slowly a cold smile spread across his face. It was the smile of a predator who realized he had been caught, but also realized he had the upper hand. "You did not see anything," Reynolds Carter said softly, walking toward him. "And neither did your mutt." Atlas snarled, snapping his jaws at the air inches from Carter's face. The dog knew. He could smell the lie. He wanted to bite. He wanted to take the bad man down. Jack tightened his grip on the collar, holding the dog back. "Do not do this, Greg." Carter stopped just out of biting range. He looked at Atlas with pure, unadulterated hatred. "That dog is dangerous, Jack. Unstable. He just tried to attack a superior officer. I think he needs to be put down. Do not you..." The threat was clear. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about survival. Suddenly, the sound of heavy boots came running down the hall. The rest of the team was returning. "Lieutenant, we have the perimeter secured," one of the officers shouted, coming around the corner. Carter's demeanor changed instantly. He stepped back, raising his hands in a mock defensive gesture, looking shaken. "Get this dog away from me," he shouted, his voice shaking with fake fear. Reynolds lose control of him. "He almost bit me." What Jack stammered, caught off guard by the sudden shift. No, he was alerting. He saw... "Get him out of here," Carter barked, pointing at the exit. "That is a direct order, Reynolds. Get that animal out of my crime scene before I have him shot." The other officers looked at Jack, confused and wary. They saw a growling, snapping dog and a shaken lieutenant. They didn't see the money in the vest. They didn't see the truth. Jack looked at Carter, then at the wall of money, then at his fellow officers. He realized with a sinking feeling that he had already lost. If he accused Carter now without proof, it would look like insubordination. It would look like he was crazy. He needed proof. He looked down at Atlas. The dog was still focused on Carter's chest, growling low in his throat. "Let's go," Jack whispered, pulling the dog away. He dragged Atlas backward, retreating from the room. As they walked away, Jack's mind raced. He needed to document this. He needed to get the dog out of the line of fire. But as they exited the warehouse into the pouring rain, Jack didn't know that the trap had already been sprung. Carter wasn't just going to hide the money. He was going to frame the only man who could expose him. And as Jack loaded a furious, barking Atlas into the back of the patrol unit that night, he didn't realize it was the last time they would work together as free men. The rain washed away the blood on the pavement, but it couldn't wash away the scent of betrayal. Atlas sat in his cage, staring through the wire mesh, his eyes burning with a memory that would last for 6 long months. He knew who the bad man was, and he was just waiting for the command to prove it. Now, 6 months later, kneeling in the mud of the courthouse parking lot, Jack felt the memory crash over him like a tidal wave. He felt the phantom weight of the leash in his hand. He heard the growl, and looking at the keys dangling from Carter's hand, the keys with the piece of leather that smelled of that night, Jack realized that the nightmare wasn't over. It was just reaching its climax. The past had finally caught up to the present. The next morning, the world exploded again, but this time there was no rain, only the blinding white light of a Tuesday sun that felt like an interrogation lamp. Jack was in his kitchen brewing coffee, his hands still shaking slightly from the events of the previous night. He hadn't slept. He had spent the hours pacing, staring at the phone, debating whether to call internal affairs, whether to call the chief, whether to just pack a bag and run. But running was an admission of guilt, and Jack Reynolds didn't run. Atlas was lying by the back door, his head resting on his paws. He was calm, but his eyes were open, watching Jack with that unnerving intensity that only a working dog possesses. He knew something was wrong. He could smell the cortisol pouring off his handler. The first sign of trouble wasn't a siren. It was the sound of heavy boots on the gravel driveway, a sound Jack knew too well. It was the sound of a raid. Before Jack could even put down his mug, the front door burst open. Police search warrant. The shout was followed by a flood of black uniforms. It wasn't the local PD. It was internal affairs backed by a tactical team from the county sheriff's office. They moved with a speed and aggression usually reserved for drug dens, not the home of a decorated 30-year veteran. Jack on the ground. Now, a dozen weapons were trained on him. Jack raised his hands slowly, his mind reeling. He didn't fight. He knew the drill. He dropped to his knees, interlocking his fingers behind his head. The cold linoleum bit into his skin as he was forced face down onto the kitchen floor. Clear, secure the suspect. Heavy hands patted him down, rough and efficient. He felt the cold steel of handcuffs ratcheting tight around his wrists. "What is this?" Jack demanded, his face pressed against the floor. "What are you doing?" "We found the money," Jack, a voice said from the doorway. It was a voice he recognized. "Captain Miller from IA." Jack twisted his head, trying to look up. "What money?" "Do not play dumb. The missing cartel cash. We got a tip it was in your garage." Jack's blood ran cold. The garage. He had left the door unlocked when he came home exhausted and distracted. It would have been easy. Too easy. Atlas. The dog had been in the backyard, but the commotion had drawn him to the screen door. Seeing his handler on the ground, seeing strangers armed and aggressive in his home, Atlas reacted exactly as he was trained to do. He hit the screen door with a force that shattered the latch, bursting into the kitchen like a guided missile. He wasn't barking. He was silent, lethal, moving to neutralize the threat. "Dog, dog." The shout went up from the tactical team. Weapons swung away from Jack and toward the charging animal. "No, do not shoot!" Jack screamed, struggling against the officer holding him down. "Atlas, stand down." But the command came too late, or perhaps the threat was too great. Atlas launched himself at the nearest officer, jaws snapping closed on the man's padded arm guard. The officer shouted, spinning, trying to shake the 90-pound shepherd. "Taser, taser, taser." The pop of the air cartridge was followed by the distinct crackle of electricity. The probes hit Atlas in the flank. The dog convulsed, yelping, a sound of shock and pain that tore through Jack's heart. Atlas dropped his muscles, seizing, but his spirit was unbroken. As soon as the current stopped, he tried to get up, growling, snapping, trying to crawl toward Jack to protect him. "Sedate him," someone yelled. "He is too dangerous." A medic from the tactical team moved in with a syringe pole. He jabbed it into the dog's hip. Atlas snarled, twisting to bite the metal rod, but the drug was fast-acting. Within seconds, his struggles weakened. His eyes glazed over. His head grew heavy, sinking to the floor. He looked at Jack one last time, a look of confusion and betrayal before his eyes rolled back and he went limp. "You bastards!" Jack roared, thrashing against his restraints. "You did not have to do that." "Get him up," Miller ordered. They hauled Jack to his feet, dragging him toward the door. As they passed the living room window, Jack saw it. Officers were carrying boxes out of his garage. One of them held up a clear evidence bag. Inside were stacks of cash, the same vacuum-sealed bricks he had seen in the warehouse wall. "It is a setup," Jack shouted, his voice echoing in the small house. Carter planted it. "Check the prints. Check the serial numbers. Save it for the judge," Reynolds, Miller said coldly. As they dragged him out to the patrol car, Jack's eyes darted around the chaos. He saw Atlas lying unconscious on the kitchen floor, two officers standing over him with catch poles ready to drag him to a cage. "Wait," Jack said, suddenly stopping his struggle. "My dog. His collar." Miller frowned. "What about it?" "It is too tight." Jack lied, his mind racing. "If he swells up from the taser, it will choke him. Let me take it off. Please. He is just a dog. Do not kill him by accident." Miller hesitated, then nodded to the officer near the dog. "Take it off. Bag it with his personal effects." The officer knelt, unbuckling the heavy leather tactical collar from Atlas's neck. He held it up. It was a custom piece, wide and reinforced with a heavy brass buckle. "Give it to me," Jack said, reaching out with his cuffed hands. "Let me hold it. Just for a second." The officer looked at Miller, who shrugged. Jack grabbed the collar, clutching it tight. His fingers found the small hidden seam on the inside of the leather near the buckle. It was a tiny pouch designed for a GPS tracker or a spare key, but Jack had put something else in there. The night before, after the raid, Jack had downloaded the audio from his body mic onto a micro SD card. He knew Carter would try to wipe the servers. He knew the digital evidence would disappear, so he had made a physical copy. He had hidden it in the one place he thought would be safe, on his dog. But now they were taking the dog, and if they processed the collar into evidence, they would find the card. Or worse, Carter would find it. Jack looked around desperately. He was standing near the open trunk of the patrol car. A pile of confiscated gear sat in a cardboard box nearby. A tackle box, a flashlight, and some old tools from his garage. Junk. Stuff they were taking just to be thorough. Hey, watch out. Jack feigned a stumble, lurching to the side as if he lost his balance. He collided with the officer holding the box, knocking it over. The contents spilled onto the driveway. Chaos. Shouts. Hands grabbing him. In the confusion, Jack dropped the collar. He didn't just drop it. He kicked it. A subtle practice slide of his boot, sending the leather strip sliding under the pile of spilled junk right into the open bottom of a discarded cardboard box. "Get him in the car!" Miller shouted, shoving Jack into the back seat. Jack watched through the window, his heart pounding. The officers were cleaning up the mess, throwing the tools back into the box. One of them picked up the cardboard box, dumping the random items back inside. He didn't look closely. He just scooped up the debris, including the collar buried at the bottom, and tossed the whole box into the trunk of a sleek, unmarked sedan parked next to the squad car. Jack froze. That wasn't an evidence car. That was a personal vehicle. A silver sports car. Lieutenant Carter's car. Carter walked into view holding a coffee cup, looking fresh and rested. He smiled at Jack through the glass, a shark in a suit. He walked to his car, opened the trunk, and slammed it shut, sealing the box and the collar inside. Jack sank back against the seat, a cold realization washing over him. Carter had the evidence. He didn't know he had it, but he had it. He was driving away with the only thing that could prove Jack's innocence. And Atlas knew. Even sedated, even unconscious, the dog knew the scent of that collar. It was his. As the patrol car pulled away, Jack looked back one last time. He saw them dragging Atlas's limp body out of the house, loading him into a cage. "I will come back for you," Jack whispered, his forehead pressed against the cold glass. "I promise." But promises felt empty when you were staring down the barrel of a 20-year sentence. The flashback faded, the bright morning sun dimming back into the gray rain of the present. Jack blinked, returning to the mud of the courthouse lot. He looked at Carter standing there, smug and victorious. He looked at the keys in Carter's hand. The leather fob. It was a piece of the old leash. But the collar was still in the car. Atlas growled again, low and dangerous, his eyes fixed on Carter's trunk. He remembers Jack thought. He remembers the scent. And he is going to get it back. The ghost of the past vanished as quickly as it had arrived, dissolved by the freezing rain that slashed against Jack's face. The roar of the warehouse gunfight faded, leaving only the wet slap of tires on pavement, and the heavy, ragged breathing of the dog in his arms. The transition was jarring, a physical shock that left Jack dizzy. One moment he was standing in the humid heat of a crime scene, witnessing a betrayal, and the next, he was kneeling in the mud of a courthouse parking lot, a convicted felon minutes away from losing everything. But the memory had done its job. It had sharpened his senses. It had reminded him of exactly who Greg Carter was and exactly what was at stake. Jack blinked, water dripping from his eyelashes, clearing his vision. He looked up. Carter was still there, standing under the shelter of his black umbrella, impeccable, dry, and smiling. He watched Jack holding the shivering dog with a look of detached amusement, like a scientist observing a specimen in a jar. He took a step forward, his expensive Italian leather shoes crunching softly on the gravel. He didn't seem afraid of the dog anymore. Perhaps he thought the muzzle and the chains and the broken spirit of the animal rendered it harmless. Or perhaps his arrogance had simply grown so large it eclipsed his survival instinct. Carter signaled the guards to stay back with a casual wave of his hand. He wanted this moment to be personal. He wanted to twist the knife one last time before the show was over. He stopped just out of kicking range, leaning in slightly so his voice would carry under the drumming of the rain. The smell of his cologne, expensive and cloying, drifted down to Jack, mixing with the scent of wet asphalt and dog fur. "It is a touching scene," Jack Carter said softly, his voice smooth as silk. Really, it brings a tear to my eye. The fallen hero and his faithful beast. It is poetic in a pathetic sort of way. Jack didn't rise to the bait. He kept his hand on Atlas's flank, feeling the dog's muscles trembling beneath the wet coat. He felt the low rumble of a growl building in Atlas's chest, a vibration that hummed against Jack's own ribcage. You won, Greg, Jack said, his voice low and hoarse. You got the badge. You got the promotion. You got the money. Isn't that enough? Why do you have to kill him? Just let him retire. Let someone adopt him. Carter laughed, a short, sharp sound that lacked any warmth. Adopt him. Look at him, Jack. He is a weapon. You made him that way. And weapons do not get to retire. They get decommissioned. Carter leaned closer, dropping his voice to a whisper meant only for Jack. Besides, I cannot have him out there, can I? He makes people nervous. He reminds people of things they should forget. He reminds me of you, and I am done thinking about you. Jack tightened his grip on Atlas's fur. The dog had stopped shivering. The growl had stopped too, replaced by a sudden, intense stillness. Atlas lifted his muzzle, sniffing the air rapidly. His nostrils flared, widening as he pulled in a scent stream that was invisible to the humans but screaming loud and clear to him. Carter reached into his pocket. The movement was casual, arrogant. He pulled out the set of keys Jack had noticed earlier. He jingled them, the metallic sound sharp and discordant in the heavy air. You know I kept something, Carter whispered, his eyes glinting with malice. A little souvenir from the night I raided your house, the night we found the money you stole. He isolated a specific item on the key ring and held it up. It was a fob made of thick braided leather, dark with oil and age, attached to a heavy brass ring. Do you recognize this, Jack? Jack stared. His heart hammered against his sternum. He did recognize it. It was the pull tab from Atlas's tactical collar. The leather strap Jack used to hold the dog back before a release command. It had been attached to the main collar the night of the raid. I found it in the box of junk my guys took from your garage, Carter said, smiling. I thought about throwing it away, but then I thought, no, it is a trophy, a reminder of the dog that almost bit me, and the man who thought he could outsmart me. So I put it on my keys. Carter dangled the leather strip in front of Jack's face, taunting him. I call it my good luck charm. It goes everywhere with me. It is in my pocket when I drive my new car. It is on my desk when I sign orders. And today, it is right here while I watch you go to prison and watch your dog go to the vet for the last time. Jack stared at the piece of leather. His mind was racing, spinning, connecting dots at a speed that made him dizzy. The collar. Carter had the collar. He didn't just have the pull tab. He had the whole thing. The box. The box Jack had kicked the collar into. Carter said he found the tab in the box of junk. That meant he had kept the box. He probably had it in his trunk right now, intending to sort through it later, or just keeping it as part of his collection of victories. And if he had the box, he had the collar. And if he had the collar, he had the SD card. Jack looked at Atlas. The dog's head was craned forward, straining against the muzzle. He wasn't looking at Jack. He wasn't looking at the guards. He was staring fixedly at the leather tab in Carter's hand. Atlas let out a sound that was half whine, half bark. It was a sound of recognition, a sound of possession. He smelled it. He smelled his own scent on the leather. He smelled the oil Jack used to condition it. He smelled the history of 1,000 patrols and 100 arrests embedded in that strip of hide. But more than that, he smelled the proximity of the rest of it. Jack glanced past Carter to the silver sports car parked under the floodlights 10 yards away. It was a Corvette, sleek and expensive, the kind of car a lieutenant on a police salary shouldn't be able to afford. Atlas shifted his gaze. He looked from the leather tab in Carter's hand to the car, then back to the tab. His tail gave a single stiff wag. The tip of his nose quivered. He knows, Jack thought. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. He knows it is there. It was canine logic. Simple, direct, unbreakable. The scent on the man matched the scent in the car. The object that belonged to the dog was close, and Atlas wanted it back. Carter saw Jack staring at the keys and mistook the look for defeat. He chuckled, closing his hand over the leather tab, extinguishing the sight of it. Does it hurt? Jack Carter taunted. Does it hurt to know that I own everything that used to be yours? Your reputation, your freedom, even your dog's leash. Jack looked up. The despair that had clouded his eyes for 6 months began to clear. In its place, a cold, hard resolve started to burn. It was the look of the old Jack Reynolds, the street cop who never backed down from a fight. "You kept it," Jack said, his voice steady, surprisingly calm. "You kept the collar." Carter shrugged, pocketing the keys. "Like I said, a souvenir." "And it is in your car?" Jack asked. "Right now." Carter frowned, confused by the question. "Yeah, it is in the trunk with the rest of your garbage. I'm going to mount it on my wall tonight, after I get the call that the dog is dead." "Why?" Jack didn't answer. He didn't have to. He looked at Sarah Jenkins standing a few feet away. The internal affairs officer was watching them closely, her arms crossed over her chest. She couldn't hear the whisper, but she could see the body language. She saw the taunt. She saw the keys. And she saw the dog. Atlas was now standing rigid, his body pressed against Jack's leg. He was vibrating with potential energy, a coiled spring waiting to snap. He was looking at Carter's car with a focus that was terrifying. He let out a sharp, demanding bark. Woof! It wasn't a bark of anger. It was an alert. Sarah's brow furrowed. She took a half step closer, her eyes flicking from the dog to the car. She had worked with canine units before. She knew what an alert looked like. Carter checked his watch and sighed loudly. "All right, time is up. Show is over, Reynolds." He stepped back, signaling the handlers. "Get the dog. Load him up." The handlers moved forward, reaching for the catch poles. Jack felt Atlas tense. The dog growled low and guttural, warning them back. "No," Jack said. "Not yet. You do not have a choice," Carter snapped. "You got your minute. Now say goodbye." Jack looked at Carter. He looked at the arrogance etched into every line of the man's face. He thought about the money in the wall. He thought about the lies. He thought about the 6 months of hell he had endured. And he realized that this was it. This was the Hail Mary. There was no appeal coming. There was no miracle witness. There was only a dog-a-nose and a piece of evidence hidden in the trunk of a corrupt cop's car. If he was wrong, Atlas would just attack the car and they would shoot him. Jack would go to prison forever and Carter would win. But if he was right, Jack leaned down, pressing his cheek against the top of Atlas's head. He closed his eyes, breathing in the scent of wet fur. "You want your collar, boy," Jack whispered into the dog's ear. "You want it back." Atlas whined, his tail thumping against Jack's leg. He nudged Jack's pocket again, then looked at the car. Jack's heart was pounding so hard he thought it might burst. He reached up with his cuffed hands and grabbed the quick release buckle of the muzzle. "Hey, what are you doing?" Carter shouted, stepping forward. "Do not touch that muzzle." "Restrain him," Sarah ordered, but she didn't move to stop him. She watched. Jack's fingers fumbled with the wet plastic buckle. It was stiff, tight, but then with a snap it came loose. He pulled the muzzle off. Atlas opened his mouth, taking a deep, greedy gulp of air. He panted, his long pink tongue lolling out. He didn't bite. He didn't snarl. He looked at Jack, his expression expectant, waiting. "Get the gun!" Carter screamed, pulling his own weapon. "He is loose." Jack stood up. He stood tall, ignoring the chains, ignoring the guards. He locked eyes with his partner. "Atlas," Jack said, his voice ringing out clear and strong over the rain. The dog locked on. Jack pointed a trembling, cuffed hand toward the silver Corvette, toward the trunk, toward the truth. "Such verloren," Jack commanded. "Seek the lost." It was the old search command, the one they used for evidence recovery, the one they used when something important was missing. Atlas didn't hesitate. He didn't look back. He launched himself from Jack's side like a missile fired from a silo. His claws tore into the asphalt, finding traction where there was none. He became a streak of black and sable motion, a force of nature directed at a single target. He wasn't attacking the man. He was attacking the lie. The rain continued to fall in relentless gray sheets, washing over the courthouse parking lot like a curtain of static, but in the center of that downpour, the dynamic had shifted with the sudden violence of a thunderclap. Moments ago, there had been only a broken man and a grieving dog clinging to each other in the mud, a tableau of despair that had made even the hardened correction officers look away in discomfort. But now the emotional gravity of the scene snapped. Jack felt the change in his arms before he saw it. The massive head of the German shepherd, which had been buried against his chest seeking comfort, suddenly lifted. The frantic, desperate whimpering that had torn at Jack's heart stopped abruptly, as if a switch had been flipped deep inside the animal's brain. Atlas's body, which had been shivering with a mix of cold and trauma, went rigid. The muscles beneath Jack's hands turned to steel, coiling with a tension that hummed through his wet uniform. Jack pulled back slightly, wiping rain from his eyes, confused by the sudden rejection. He whispered the dog's name, expecting Atlas to nuzzle him again to seek that reassurance they both desperately needed, but Atlas wasn't looking at him. The dog had detached himself from the emotional reunion completely. He stood on four legs, his paws sinking into the sludge, his posture shifting from submissive to dominant in the blink of an eye. The dog began to work the air. It was a sight Jack had seen 1,000 times on 1,000 different nights, but never had it looked so terrifyingly intense. Atlas's snout lifted toward the sky, his black nose twitching rapidly, expanding and contracting as he pulled in gallons of air, processing the invisible world that humans could never perceive. He huffed loudly, clearing the scent of the rain and the mud and the exhaust fumes filtering through the millions of receptors in his olfactory system to find the one molecule that didn't belong. He began to throw his head from side to side, casting for the scent cone. He ignored the guards, who took a nervous step back, their hands hovering over their batons. He ignored Sarah Jenkins, who was watching him with narrowed, analytical eyes. He even ignored Jack. For a handler, this was the moment of truth. This was the moment when the bond was tested against the instinct. Usually Atlas would check in. He would look to Jack for direction, for the hand signal that told him where to search. But today, Atlas was self-deploying. He was driving the bus. He took a step forward, dragging Jack's hand with him. His breathing changed, shifting from the ragged panting of stress to the rhythmic, deep inhalations of a hunting predator. He snorted, clearing his nose again, and then he froze, his head locked onto a target. 15 meters away, parked alone under the stark white glare of a sodium floodlight, sat Lieutenant Carter's personal vehicle. It was a silver Corvette, a machine of vanity and excess that gleamed even under the layer of grime from the storm. It was a car that a police lieutenant on a municipal salary had no business driving, a symbol of the corruption that Jack had tried and failed to expose. Atlas stared at the car. He didn't just look at it. He bored into it. His ears pricked forward, standing tall and sharp against the rain. His tail, which had been tucked between his legs in misery, rose slowly until it was level with his spine, stiff as a rod. Jack followed the dog's gaze. He looked at the sleek silver lines of the sports car, then back at the dog. He felt a jolt of confusion. Atlas had never cared about cars before unless there was a suspect hiding inside, but the Corvette was empty. The engine was cold. "What is it, boy?" Jack whispered the words, lost in the wind. "What do you see?" Atlas didn't answer. He took another step, straining against the grip Jack still had on his collar. He leaned his entire weight forward, his front paws scrabbling for traction on the slick asphalt. He was pulling toward the car with a magnetic intensity, like a compass needle swinging north. And then the sound began. It wasn't a growl. It wasn't the guttural, throat-ripping threat that he had directed at the guards earlier. It was something else entirely. It started low in his chest, a rhythmic huffing sound that built rapidly in volume. Woof. Pause. Woof. Pause. Woof. Jack's blood ran cold. He knew that sound. Every canine handler in the state knew that sound. It was the alert bark. It was the specific cadence Atlas used when he had located a trained odor. It was the sound he made when he found a kilo of cocaine hidden in a gas tank or a stick of dynamite buried in a garden. It was a demand. It was a notification. It translated to one thing and one thing only. I have found it. My reward is here. But what had he found? The Corvette was clean. Carter was too smart to transport narcotics in his personal vehicle, especially to a courthouse. He was too arrogant to be that sloppy. There shouldn't be anything in that car that would trigger a narcotics or explosives detection dog. Yet Atlas continued to bark, his voice rising in pitch and urgency. The sound echoed off the brick walls of the courthouse, a sharp staccato hammer blow that cut through the drone of the rain. He wasn't barking at the tires. He wasn't barking at the doors. He was barking directly at the rear of the vehicle, at the trunk. Jack watched the dog's behavior, analyzing it with the part of his brain that hadn't been dulled by prison. The head snap, the refusal to break focus, the bracket search pattern he was trying to execute even while restrained. This was a positive hit, a strong one. Carter, who had been checking his watch with an air of bored impatience, looked up. The rhythmic barking annoyed him. He frowned, stepping to the edge of the dry concrete. "Shut that mutt up," Reynolds Carter shouted, his voice irritated. "The minute is up. He is making a scene." But Jack didn't hear him. His mind was racing, connecting the dots that were exploding in his consciousness. He looked at the keys dangling from Carter's hand. He saw the leather tab. He looked at the dog. He looked at the trunk of the car. The scent. Atlas wasn't alerting to drugs. He wasn't alerting to a bomb. He was alerting to the source of the scent he had caught on the keys. He was alerting to his own gear. Jack remembered the training sessions. They had spent years perfecting evidence recovery. Jack would throw a set of keys or a gun or a wallet into a field of tall grass, and Atlas would track it down not by the smell of metal or plastic, but by the human scent attached to it. Jack's scent, or in this case, Atlas's own scent, mixed with the oil and sweat of the leather collar. The collar was in the trunk. It had to be. That was why Carter had the tab. He had kept the box of confiscated items. He had thrown it in the back of his fancy car and forgotten about it. To Atlas, that trunk wasn't just a car part. It was a container holding the most precious thing in the world, his identity, his work, the object that connected him to his master. Atlas lunged again, his paws slipping, lifting the front of his body off the ground. The bark became a continuous roar of demand. He looked back at Jack for a split second, his eyes burning with a question. "Why aren't we moving? I found it. It is right there." Sarah Jenkins took a step closer. She wasn't looking at Jack anymore. She was staring at the dog, her head cocked to the side. She was listening to the bark. She had started her career in narcotics. She knew the difference between an aggression bark and an alert bark. "Why is he signaling?" Sarah asked, her voice carrying over the rain. She looked at Carter. "Lieutenant, why is that dog alerting on your vehicle?" Carter laughed, a nervous, dismissive sound. "He is not alerting. He is crazy. He is snapping at raindrops. Look at him. He is rabid. That is why he needs to be put down." "He is not snapping," Jack said, his voice gaining strength, rising from the mud. "He is working." Carter sneered. "Working. He is brain damaged, just like his owner. Guards, get him." The two corrections officers moved forward, reaching for Jack's arms to haul him up and drag him away. They reached for the dog's chain, ready to pull him back to the death van. Atlas sensed the movement. He spun around, putting himself between Jack and the guards. He let out a snarl that was very different from the alert bark, a warning that made the guards freeze in their tracks. Then immediately he whipped back around to face the car and resumed the alert bark. "Woof, woof, woof." He was pleading. He was trying to tell them. The answer is in the car. The truth is in the car. Jack looked at the trunk of the Corvette. He imagined the cardboard box inside. He imagined the heavy leather collar curled at the bottom, and inside the lining of that collar, the micro SD card, the recording of Carter's voice, the recording of the betrayal, the recording that proved Jack was innocent. It was all there 15 meters away, so close and yet across an ocean of impossibility. Jack felt a surge of adrenaline so potent it made his hands shake violently. This was it. This was the miracle. The universe had aligned in the most chaotic way possible to give him one singular chance. Atlas wasn't just saying goodbye. He was giving Jack a weapon. Jack looked at the muzzle still strapped to Atlas's face. The heavy leather straps were soaked and dark. The plastic basket prevented the dog from grabbing anything, prevented him from doing his job fully. If Jack released him with the muzzle on, Atlas would just bounce off the car. He needed his teeth. He needed to be able to retrieve. Jack's hands moved instinctively. He wasn't thinking as a prisoner anymore. He was a cop. He was a partner. He reached down, his fingers fumbling with the wet buckles behind Atlas's ears. "What are you doing?" Carter shouted, seeing the movement. Jack didn't answer. He gritted his teeth, fighting the stiff leather. "Do not touch that muzzle!" Carter screamed, his hand flying to his holster. I said, "Step away from the dog." But it was too late. The buckle snapped open. The leather strap fell away. Atlas shook his head violently, sending a spray of water into the air. The heavy muzzle clattered to the asphalt. The dog opened his mouth, taking a huge gulp of air, his long tongue lolling out, his teeth gleaming white and sharp in the gloom. He didn't bite Jack. He didn't turn on the guards. He looked up at Jack, his mouth open in what looked like a grin of pure anticipation. He was ready. Jack stood up. The chains on his legs were heavy, but he stood tall, his spine straightening for the first time in months. He raised his cuffed hands, pointing a finger straight at the silver Corvette. He ignored Carter's gun. He ignored the shouting. He looked only at his partner. Atlas Jack roared, his voice cracking with the force of his command. The dog's muscles bunched. He lowered his head into the sprinting stance. Seek Jack screamed, and then he let go. Sarah Jenkins stood motionless in the freezing downpour, her trench coat soaked through and heavy against her frame, but she felt none of the cold. Her entire world had narrowed down to a single point of focus, the black and sable German shepherd straining at the end of the chain. She watched the animal with the clinical detached eye of an internal affairs investigator. She had spent 15 years hunting bad cops. She knew what liars looked like. She knew the telltale signs of deception, the micro-expressions, the nervous tics, the way a man's voice pitched up when he was losing control of a narrative. She had seen all of that in Lieutenant Carter in the last 5 minutes. The arrogant smile that didn't reach his eyes, the way his hand hovered constantly over his service weapon, the beads of sweat forming on his upper lip despite the frigid temperature. But it was the dog that shattered her composure. She knew dogs. Before she was IA, she had been a patrol officer, and before that, she had grown up in a house full of working breeds. She knew the difference between a dog that was reacting out of fear and a dog that was reacting out of aggression. The narrative Carter had sold to the department and to the court was that Atlas was a broken weapon, a rabid beast that had turned on its handlers because of trauma. He was supposed to be chaotic, unpredictable, and dangerous, but what Sarah was seeing now did not fit that profile. The barking. It was a sound that vibrated in her own chest, a rhythmic percussion that echoed off the wet concrete. Woof, pause, woof, pause, woof. It was mechanical, precise. It wasn't the hysterical, high-pitched screaming of a distressed animal. It was the deep, resonant cadence of a trained alert. Sarah took a step closer, her boots splashing in a puddle. She tilted her head, ignoring the rain running down her neck, trying to isolate the sound. She had heard that specific bark before on drug raids and bomb sweeps. It was the sound of discovery. It was the sound a dog made when it hit the source of an odor it had been programmed to find. Why she whispered to herself the word lost in the storm. Why is he alerting? Her eyes tracked the dog's line of sight. Atlas wasn't looking at Jack anymore. He wasn't looking at the guards who were tightening their grip on his leads. He was looking past everyone, staring with a laser-like intensity at the silver Corvette parked alone under the floodlight. The car was empty. Sarah had seen Carter arrive. She had seen him get out, lock the door, and walk over to the loading dock. There was no one inside, no movement, no threat. To a normal observer, it was just an expensive piece of machinery sitting in the rain, but Atlas was treating it like it was the most important thing in the world. He lunged again, his front paws lifting off the ground, his body twisting in the air as he tried to propel himself toward the vehicle. The muzzle strapped to his face muffled the sound, but it couldn't hide the intent. He wasn't trying to attack the car. He was trying to get to it. He was trying to mark it. Sarah looked at Carter. The lieutenant was shifting his weight from foot to foot, his eyes darting between the dog and the car. He wasn't looking at the dog with fear anymore. He was looking at it with hatred, pure, unadulterated hatred. And beneath the hatred there was something else, something that made the hair on the back of Sarah's neck stand up. Panic. Carter was terrified, not of being bitten, but of what the dog was saying. A realization bloomed in Sarah's mind, cold and sharp as a knife. The dog wasn't crazy. The dog was working. Jack Reynolds wasn't whispering goodbyes to his pet. He was giving commands to his partner. This entire scene, the begging, the kneeling, the emotional reunion, it was a play. Jack had manipulated Carter into bringing the dog out. He had manipulated the situation to get Atlas close to that car. Why? What was in the car? Sarah looked at the Corvette again. It was clean. Too clean. Carter was a man who prided himself on appearance. He wouldn't have contraband in his personal vehicle, unless he didn't know it was contraband, or unless he thought it was just trash. She remembered the case files she had reviewed the night before, the missing body cam footage, the missing tactical collar, the discrepancies in the timeline of the raid. It had all seemed like sloppy police work at the time, but looking at it now through the lens of a desperate man and a focused dog, the pieces began to shift. "Stand down!" Sarah shouted, her voice cutting through the noise. The two guards who were about to drag Jack away froze. They looked at her confused. Carter spun around his face, twisting in anger. "What are you doing, Sarah? Let's wrap this up. The show is over." "No," Sarah said, walking forward. Her stride was long and purposeful. She didn't look at Carter. She looked straight at the dog. "It isn't over." She stopped 3 feet from Atlas. The dog didn't growl at her. He didn't even look at her. He kept his eyes locked on the car, barking that same relentless rhythm. He was ignoring the threat of the stranger because the drive to complete his mission was stronger than his instinct for self-preservation. That was the mark of an elite K9. "He is alerting," Sarah said, pointing at the dog. "That is a positive alert on your vehicle, Lieutenant." Carter laughed, a sound that was too loud and too brittle. "You are joking, right? He is barking at his reflection in the bumper. He is brain damaged, Sarah. Look at him. He is frothing at the mouth." "He is not frothing," Sarah countered, her voice steady. "He is frustrated. He is trying to retrieve something, and he cannot because of that muzzle." She looked at Jack. The prisoner was standing tall now, the chains dripping from his wrists. His eyes met hers. There was no deception there, only a fierce burning plea. "Let him work," Jack said. "Just let him work." Sarah made a decision. It was a decision that could end her career. If she was wrong, if she released a condemned police dog and it mauled a high-ranking officer, she would be fired, charged, and probably sued into oblivion. She would be the laughingstock of the department. But if she walked away now, if she let them put this dog in a gas chamber and sent this man to prison while that dog was screaming the truth, she would never sleep again. She turned to the guards. "Step back." What Carter shouted, stepping forward, his hand dropping to his holster. "You cannot give orders here, Jenkins. This is my operation. I am internal affairs." Sarah snapped, whipping her head around to glare at him. "And I am declaring this an active crime scene investigation based on probable cause provided by a certified K9 alert. If you interfere, Lieutenant, I will have you in cuffs for obstruction of justice before you can blink." Carter froze. The threat was real, and he knew it. Sarah turned back to the dog. She stepped into the kill zone. She was now within biting range of a 90-pound shepherd that was supposedly a man-eater. She could feel the heat radiating off his body. She could smell the wet fur and the intense musk of a working animal. Atlas paused his barking for a split second. He turned his head, looking at her. His amber eyes were intelligent questioning. He seemed to be assessing her not as a threat, but as an obstacle. "I am going to take this off," Sarah whispered to the dog, her hands trembling slightly as she reached out. "Do not make me regret this." She reached for the heavy leather straps behind the dog's ears. The buckle was wet and slick. "Stop!" Carter screamed. "He is going to kill you." Sarah ignored him. She ignored the guards who were tensing up, ready to fire. She ignored the rain. She focused entirely on the leather strap. Her fingers fumbled with the clasp. It was stiff tight against the dog's skull. Atlas didn't move. He held perfectly still, stretching his neck out to give her better access. He knew. He understood what she was doing. He wanted the muzzle off more than she did. With a sharp click, the buckle released. Sarah pulled the straps loose. The heavy basket muzzle fell away from the dog's face, clattering onto the asphalt. Atlas shook his head violently, sending a spray of water into the air. He opened his mouth wide, taking a huge gulp of oxygen, his long tongue lolling out. He panted, showing a mouthful of white, formidable teeth. For a second, the entire parking lot held its breath. This was the moment the monster was supposed to attack. This was the moment the broken dog was supposed to turn on the nearest human and tear them apart. But Atlas didn't bite. He didn't even look at Sarah. He turned his head back to the car. He lowered his body into a sprinting crouch, his muscles bunching like coiled steel. He let out one single deafening bark that sounded like a starter pistol. He looked back at Jack one last time, his tail wagging a blur of motion. He was asking for permission. He was asking for the green light. Sarah stepped back, giving him the lane. She looked at Jack and nodded. "Do it," she said. Jack raised his cuffed hand, pointing at the silver Corvette. "Atlas." Jack roared, "Seek!" The dog exploded into motion. He didn't run, he flew. He covered the 15 meters in 3 powerful bounds, a streak of black lightning against the gray sky. He hit the car not with the tentative sniff of a search, but with the overwhelming force of a raid. He wasn't just indicating, he was taking possession. And as Sarah watched the dog scramble up the bumper of the lieutenant's car, claws screeching on the paint, She knew with absolute certainty that she had just unlocked the box that would destroy Greg Carter's life. The tension in the courthouse lot was a physical weight heavier than the chains binding Jack's wrists, colder than the rain soaking his skin. Jack knelt in the mud, his face inches from the wet, panting snout of the German Shepherd. The heavy leather basket muzzle lay on the asphalt like a discarded shackle, black and slick with rain. Atlas was free. He took deep, greedy gulps of the damp air, his tongue lolling, his chest heaving not from exhaustion but from anticipation. He stood statue still, his amber eyes locked onto Jack's with an intensity that burned. There was no confusion in that gaze anymore, no madness. The chaotic, terrified creature that had been dragged out of the van just minutes ago had vanished. In his place stood the partner Jack had trained from a pup, the partner who had walked through fire and bullets by his side, the partner who knew Jack's mind better than Jack knew it himself. Jack leaned forward. To the observers standing in the periphery, to the guards with their hands on their batons, and to the lieutenant checking his watch under the dry shelter of the overhang, it looked like a final moment of grief. It looked like a broken man saying goodbye to his best friend before the inevitable end. It looked like defeat, but it wasn't defeat. It was a briefing. Jack pressed his forehead against the dog's broad, flat skull. He closed his eyes, inhaling the scent of wet fur and the deep, earthy musk of the animal. He felt the coarse hair bristling against his skin. He felt the heat radiating from the dog's body, a furnace of potential energy waiting to be unleashed. "Listen to me," Jack whispered, his voice barely a breath lost in the sound of the falling rain. "Listen close, buddy." Atlas didn't move a muscle, but his ears swiveled forward, tuning out the wind, tuning out the sirens, tuning out everything but the frequency of Jack's voice. He let out a soft, low whine in the back of his throat, a man of acknowledgement. He was listening. Jack's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat of adrenaline and hope. He knew he only had seconds. Carter was getting impatient. The guards were getting restless. The window of opportunity was closing fast. "Do you smell it?" Jack murmured, his lips brushing the velvet softness of the dog's ear. "Do you smell your collar?" Atlas's tail gave a single stiff thump against Jack's leg. His nose twitched, the nostrils flaring as he pulled in the scent stream again. He shifted his weight, leaning almost imperceptibly toward the silver sports car parked under the floodlights. He knew. He had known from the moment the door opened. The scent of his own gear, the scent of the leather he had worn every day for 5 years, was calling to him from the trunk of that car. "It is in there," Jack whispered. "The bad man has it." He felt a tremor run through Atlas's body. The dog's lips curled back slightly, revealing the gleaming white of his canines. A low rumble started in his chest, a growl that was felt rather than heard. It wasn't a growl of anger. It was a growl of possession. That collar was his, and someone else had it. Jack opened his eyes. He looked past the dog's shoulder, straight at Lieutenant Greg Carter. Carter was standing 10 yards away, one hand in his pocket, the other holding his umbrella. He was watching them with a look of bored contempt. He saw Jack kneeling in the mud, hugging the dog, and he saw weakness. He saw a man who had been beaten. He saw a nuisance that was finally being flushed away. He didn't see the trap. But then Carter's eyes flicked to the dog. He saw the muzzle lying on the ground. He saw the way Atlas was standing, not cowering, not thrashing, but poised like a loaded weapon. Carter's smile faltered. He took a half step back, his expensive shoes slipping slightly on the wet concrete. His hand, the one in his pocket, moved. It drifted upward toward his hip, toward his holster. He knows, Jack thought. He senses it. The predator in Carter recognized the predator in Atlas. The primal instinct that had allowed Carter to climb the ranks by stepping on the necks of good cops was warning him now something was wrong. This wasn't a goodbye. This was a huddle. Jack tightened his grip on the scruff of Atlas's neck. He needed to be fast. He needed to be clear. "You go get it," Jack whispered, the command forming on his tongue like a prayer. "You go get it all back." He took a deep breath, filling his lungs with the cold, wet air. He remembered the training fields where they had spent thousands of hours perfecting this exact sequence. He remembered the long days in the sun teaching Atlas to track, to search, to retrieve. He remembered the specific command he used for high-value targets. Not just seek, not just find, but the command that meant do not stop until you have it in your teeth. Jack leaned back, pulling his face away so he could look directly into Atlas's eyes. "Atlas, The dog's focus snapped to him. The connection was electric absolute. Such verloren. The words were German. Seek the lost. It was an old command, archaic and rarely used, a holdover from Atlas's early training days with a master in Bavaria. It was a command that bypassed the standard police protocols. It wasn't about apprehending a suspect. It wasn't about biting an arm. It was about recovering what had been taken. Such verloren, Jack repeated louder this time, the words cutting through the rain. The effect on the dog was instantaneous. It was as if a high-voltage current had been shot through his spine. Atlas's body dropped lower into a sprinting crouch, his muscles bunched beneath his wet coat, rippling with explosive power, his ears pinned back against his skull, not in fear but in aerodynamic focus. He let out a sharp bark, one single explosive sound that cracked the air like a whip. Carter flinched. He dropped his umbrella. It tumbled across the asphalt, spinning in the wind. His hand closed around the grip of his service weapon. "What did you say?" Carter shouted, his voice cracking with sudden panic. "What did you say to him?" Jack stood up. The chains on his ankles clanked heavy and loud, but he didn't feel their weight anymore. He felt light. He felt dangerous. "I told him to go to work," Jack said, his voice calm and cold. Carter's eyes widened. He looked at the dog. He looked at the muzzle on the ground. He looked at Sarah Jenkins, who had stepped back, giving the dog a clear lane. "Restrain that animal!" Carter screamed, pulling his gun from its holster. "Reynolds, hold him back." "That is a direct order." But Jack didn't hold him back. He opened his hands. He raised his palms, showing the empty space where the leash should have been. "He is not my dog anymore," Lieutenant Jack said, a dark smile touching his lips. "You signed the order, remember? He is just a stray now." Carter leveled his weapon at the dog. "No, do not." Atlas didn't wait for the bullet. He didn't wait for the permission of the guards or the laws of men. He had his command. He had his target. And he had the burning, righteous drive of a creature that had been wronged. He launched. It wasn't a run. It was an explosion. Atlas propelled himself off his hind legs with such force that his claws tore gouges into the asphalt. He became a blur of black and tan motion, a cruise missile guided by scent and fury. He didn't run toward Jack. He didn't run toward the gate. He didn't even look at Carter standing there with his gun drawn. He ran straight at the silver Corvette. The distance was 15 meters. For a human, it would take seconds. For Atlas, it was a heartbeat. He covered the ground in long, powerful bounds, his body stretching and compressing like a spring. Water sprayed up from his paws, creating a wake behind him. Carter spun around, tracking the dog with his gun, but he was too slow. He was expecting an attack on his person. He was expecting teeth in his throat. He wasn't expecting the dog to ignore him completely. Atlas hit the car. He didn't just run into it. He attacked it. He leaped into the air, his front paws slamming onto the sleek silver trunk lid with a metal-crunching thud, his claws screeching against the expensive paintwork, carving deep white lines into the finish. He landed on the back of the car, barking wildly, biting at the seam of the trunk, scratching, digging, trying to tear his way inside. "Get him off!" Carter screamed, running toward the car, his gun waving dangerously. "Get him off my car!" But Atlas was possessed. He smelled it. It was right there, just inches away beneath the metal skin, the collar, the scent of Bucky, the scent of ghee. He bit the edge of the spoiler, his teeth sinking into the fiberglass, shaking his head violently, trying to rip it off to get to the prize underneath. Jack watched his chest heaving. He saw the panic in Carter's eyes. He saw the realization dawn on the lieutenant's face. Carter wasn't worried about the paint job. He was worried about what was inside. "He knows," Jack whispered. "He knows what he hid." Sarah Jenkins watched too, her hand on her own weapon, her eyes wide. She saw the dog's focus. She saw the location of the attack. "He is alerting," she said, her voice filled with awe. "He is alerting on the trunk." Atlas scrambled for purchase on the slippery, wet metal. He slid off the trunk, hitting the bumper, but immediately jumped back up, refusing to give up. He barked again, a deep, demanding roar that said, "Open this! Open this now!" Carter reached the car, grabbing the dog by the scruff of the neck, trying to haul him off. "Let go, you stupid mutt!" Carter yelled, striking the dog with his other hand. Atlas whipped his head around, snapping his jaws inches from Carter's face. A warning. "Do not touch me. I am working." Carter stumbled back, falling into a puddle. He looked up, terror written on his face. He looked at Jack. "Call him off." Carter pleaded, his arrogance gone, replaced by the desperate fear of a man whose house of cards was collapsing. "Call him off, Reynolds." Jack shook his head. "I cannot." Jack said, "He has a job to do, and he always finishes the job." Atlas turned back to the trunk. He dug his claws into the seam between the lid and the bumper. He whined, frustrated, scratching, biting. He knew it was there, and then with a sound of tearing rubber, he managed to get a tooth under the weather stripping. He pulled. The seal ripped loose. Jack held his breath. This was it. The moment of truth. The dog had done his part. Now it was up to the humans to see what he was showing them. Sarah Jenkins stepped forward, her gun drawn but pointed at the ground. "Open the trunk, Lieutenant," she ordered, her voice cutting through the rain. Carter looked at her. He looked at the dog tearing at his car. He looked at Jack, standing in chains, but looking like the only free man in the lot. "I said open the trunk." Sarah repeated, stepping closer. "Or I will let the dog open it for you." Carter's hand went to his pocket. To the keys with the leather tab, the keys that Atlas had tracked. He knew it was over. The dog hadn't just found a collar. He had found the end of Carter's career. The moment Jack's fingers uncurled from the thick fur of the dog's neck, time didn't just slow down, it seemed to shatter into 1,000 razor-sharp fragments. The connection between man and beast severed physically, but the psychic link, the command that had been whispered like a prayer, remained burning in the air between them. Jack didn't push the dog away. He didn't have to. The moment the restraint was gone, Atlas ceased to be a captive animal and became a projectile of pure kinetic energy. He didn't accelerate like a car or a runner building up speed. He exploded from a standstill. His hind legs dug into the rain-slicked asphalt, finding traction through sheer force of will, his claws tearing gouges into the blacktop as he launched himself forward. A spray of dirty water and grit kicked up behind him, coating Jack's shins, but Jack didn't flinch. He stayed rooted to the spot, his cuffed hands still raised, pointing toward the target, like a conductor directing a symphony of violence. The sound of the launch was a guttural roar, a noise that started deep in the shepherd's chest and ripped through the humid air, terrifying and primal. It was the sound of a predator closing the gap. "He is attacking the lieutenant." The scream came from one of the rookie corrections officers, a young man whose voice cracked with panic. It triggered a chain reaction of chaos that rippled through the parking lot. Gun, gun, gun. The shouts overlapped, creating a wall of noise. The two guards who had been standing near the transport van reacted on instinct born of fear. They dropped into shooting stances, their boots splashing in the puddles as they brought their service weapons up. The metallic clatter of safety catches being disengaged echoed ominously. They were tracking the black blur that was moving across the lot, but Atlas was too fast. He was low to the ground, a streak of sable fur moving at 30 miles an hour, cutting through the rain like a torpedo through dark water. Carter stood frozen. He had spent his entire career climbing ladders, maneuvering through politics, and stabbing backs in the quiet corridors of power. He wasn't a street cop anymore. He had forgotten the speed of violence. He saw the dog coming, and his brain simply couldn't process the reality of it. He saw the teeth. He saw the wild white-rimmed eyes. He saw the death coming for him. He fumbled for his weapon, his hand slipping on the wet grip of his pistol. His movements were clumsy, frantic, the movements of a man who knows he is too late. He managed to clear the holster, but he couldn't bring the gun up in time. He couldn't aim. He could only flinch. Atlas was 10 feet away, then 5, then he was airborne. Carter screamed a high-pitched sound of absolute terror that shamed the uniform he wore. He threw his arms up over his face, curling inward, bracing for the impact of 90 pounds of muscle and bone slamming into his chest. He expected the teeth to sink into his throat. He expected the hot spray of his own blood. He squeezed his eyes shut, his knees buckling as he waited for the end. But the impact never came. There was a rush of wind, a heavy wet displacement of air that buffeted Carter's face like a shockwave. He felt the heat of the animal's body pass within inches of his nose. He heard the snap of jaws and the heavy panting breath, but there was no pain. There was no collision. Atlas didn't want the man. Atlas wanted the prize. The dog had launched himself not at Carter, but over him. With a display of athletic prowess that defied physics, Atlas cleared the lieutenant's cowering form in a single magnificent leap. his body stretched out in midair, a sleek aerodynamic missile flying through the rain. Drops of water flew from his coat, catching the light of the flood lamps, turning into diamonds for a split second before falling into the mud. For the guards watching through the sights of their rifles, it was a moment of total confusion. They had their fingers on the triggers, ready to drop the dog to save a superior officer, but they couldn't shoot. The dog was in the air, the lieutenant was in the line of fire, and then suddenly the dog was gone past the target. Atlas landed. He didn't hit the ground. He hit metal. The sound was sickening, a heavy hollow crunch of steel buckling under weight. Atlas slammed down onto the hood of the silver Corvette with the force of a falling anvil. His claws, which had been extended for traction on the road, now acted like crampons, digging deep into the pristine metallic paint. Screech! The noise of nails dragging across expensive clear coat was piercing like a knife on a chalkboard magnified 1,000 times. White jagged lines erupted across the silver hood as Atlas scrambled for purchase, sliding on the wet, polished surface. He didn't stop. He didn't pause to bark or intimidate. He treated the $100,000 sports car like it was nothing more than an obstacle to be conquered. He scrabbled up the slope of the hood, his paws denting the metal, leaving muddy smears and deep scratches with every step. He reached the windshield and without hesitation leaped onto the roof. The car rocked violently on its suspension, the alarm system finally waking up and adding its rhythmic honking wail to the cacophony of the storm. Honk, honk, honk. The flashing orange lights of the car illuminated the scene in strobe-like bursts. Atlas stood on the roof of the Corvette for a heartbeat, a dark conqueror atop his mount. He looked wild, majestic, and terrifying. Rain ran off his muzzle as he looked down not at the people, but at the trunk of the car. Then he lunged again, sliding down the rear window and landing on the trunk lid. Back on the ground, Carter slowly lowered his arms. He was shaking. His face was pale, drained of all color, his eyes wide and unseeing. He patted his chest frantically, checking for blood, checking for holes, realizing with a slow dawning shock that he was alive. He hadn't been bitten. He turned slowly, looking at his car. He saw the scratches on the hood. He saw the dents. And he saw the dog standing on the trunk, barking furiously at the seam where the metal met the bumper. What the hell? Carter whispered, his voice trembling. What is he doing? Jack watched from his spot in the mud, a fierce, triumphant smile breaking through the grime on his face. He felt a surge of pride so strong it almost brought him to his knees again. He is not attacking you, Greg, Jack shouted, his voice cutting through the car alarm. He does not care about you. He cares about the job. The guards lowered their rifles, confusion replacing the adrenaline. They looked at Sarah Jenkins, waiting for orders. Sarah hadn't flinched. She hadn't drawn her weapon. She had watched the trajectory of the jump, and she had understood immediately. He is alerting, Sarah said loudly, pointing at the dog. He is signaling the location of the evidence. Atlas was going berserk on the trunk. He was biting at the spoiler, trying to rip it off. He was digging at the keyhole, his claws striking sparks against the metal. He whined, he barked. He growled, a chaotic symphony of frustration. He knew it was right there, just inches away beneath the steel skin, the scent of the collar, the scent of the truth. Get him off, Carter screamed, suddenly snapping out of his shock. He realized what was happening. He realized the dog wasn't crazy. The dog was right, and if that trunk opened, Carter's life was over. He raised his gun, aiming it at the dog on the back of his car. Get him off my car right now, or I will kill him. Jack lunged. The chains on his legs caught him, sending him stumbling, but he threw his shoulder forward, ignoring the pain. He didn't have a weapon. He didn't have a shield. He only had his body. Do not! You dare! Jack roared. He wasn't close enough to reach Carter, but the movement distracted the lieutenant. Carter swung the gun around, pointing at Wildy between Jack and the dog, his discipline crumbling under the pressure. Sarah Jenkins moved. She didn't shout. She didn't panic. She stepped in, closing the distance with a smooth, practiced stride. She brought her own hand up, not holding a gun, but holding a badge. Holster your weapon, Carter, she ordered, her voice like ice. Carter looked at her, his eyes manic. He is destroying my property. That animal is out of control. I have the right to defend my property. You have the right to remain silent, Sarah said, stepping between Carter and the car, shielding the dog with her own body. That dog is a sworn officer of the law currently conducting a search. If you fire that weapon, you are firing on a fellow officer. Atlas didn't care about the guns. He didn't care about the shouting. He had managed to get a tooth under the rubber seal of the trunk. He pulled. The rubber ripped away. He barked again, a deep, demanding sound that echoed the thumping of Jack's heart. "Open it!" Jack yelled. "Open the trunk, Greg, unless you have something to hide." Carter stared at the dog, then at Jack, then at Sarah. The rain ran down his face, mixing with the sweat of a man who knows the walls are closing in. He looked at the gun in his hand. For a second, Jack thought he might do it. He might shoot the dog just to stop the noise, just to stop the inevitable. But then Atlas stopped barking. He looked up from the trunk and stared directly at Carter. He didn't growl. He just watched him with those intelligent amber eyes. It was a look of judgment, a look that said, "I know what you did." Carter's hand wavered. He lowered the gun slowly, the fight draining out of him as the reality of his situation took hold. He looked at the scratches on his car, the ruin of his status symbol, and he realized that the damage was far deeper than the paint. "Open it." Sarah repeated, her hand on the butt of her own pistol. "Now." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the rain and the panting of the dog who stood victorious on the wreckage of the lieutenant's pride, waiting for the final lock to turn. The sound of the attack was excruciating, a high-pitched screech of diamond-hard keratin dragging across factory fresh clear coat that set teeth on edge even over the roar of the rain. Atlas was not merely scratching at the trunk of the silver Corvette, he was trying to excavate it. He had abandoned all training protocols, all restraint, and surrendered to the singular primal drive to retrieve. His paws blurred a frenzied windmill of motion as he dug into the seam between the trunk lid and the rear bumper, his claws carving deep, jagged trenches into the silver metallic paint. Strips of rubber weather stripping flew into the air, torn loose by snapping jaws. The expensive fiberglass of the spoiler crunched and cracked under the weight of the 90-pound shepherd as he leveraged himself backward, trying to pry the lid open with brute force. He was a force of nature, a chaotic storm of black fur and muscle focused entirely on the locked compartment beneath him. To anyone else, it looked like vandalism. To Jack, it looked like salvation. Every gouge in the paint was a victory. Every dent in the metal was a testament to the dog's loyalty. Atlas wasn't just destroying a car, he was dismantling the symbol of Carter's corruption piece by expensive piece. He barked between bites, a muffled, frustrated sound that vibrated through the chassis of the vehicle, setting off the alarm again. The lights flashed, reflecting in the puddles on the ground, creating a strobe effect that made the destruction look like a scene from a horror movie. Lieutenant Carter watched his prized possession being shredded, and for a moment his vanity warred with his terror. That car was his trophy, the tangible proof that he had won, that he was smarter and better than the dinosaurs like Jack Reynolds. Seeing it defaced by a dirty, wet animal felt like a physical assault. He took a step forward, his face twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. "Get off!" he screamed, his voice cracking. "Get away from it!" He wasn't thinking like a cop anymore. He wasn't thinking about procedure or appearances or the internal affairs officer standing 10 feet away. He was thinking about the box. The cardboard box he had tossed into the trunk 6 months ago, the one filled with useless junk from Jack's garage. He remembered seeing the old leather collar in there buried under a tangle of fishing line and wrenches. He hadn't thought twice about it then. It was just trash. But now, watching the dog tear at the steel barrier between him and that box, the memory hit him with the force of a sledgehammer. The dog knew. The dog could smell it. And if the dog got in there, if he dragged that collar out in front of Sarah Jenkins, in front of the guards, in front of Jack, it was over. They would ask why he had it. They would log it into evidence. And eventually someone would find the card. Panic, cold and suffocating, seized Carter's chest. He couldn't let that trunk open. He had to stop the dog. He had to stop the search. He reached for his hip. The movement was jerky, clumsy, born of desperation rather than training. His hand closed around the textured grip of his service weapon. He thumbed the retention strap, his fingers slipping on the wet polymer. "I said get back!" Carter roared, drawing the weapon. The sound of the gun clearing the holster was distinct, a sharp mechanical clack that cut through the noise of the rain and the alarm. It was a sound that changed everything. Jack saw it. He was 20 feet away, kneeling in the mud, his wrists bound, his ankles chained, but his eyes had never left Carter. He saw the shift in the lieutenant's stance. He saw the way Carter's focus narrowed, tunneling in on the dog. He saw the gun come up. Time seemed to suspend itself. Jack saw the raindrops bouncing off the barrel of the Glock. He saw Atlas completely oblivious, still digging frantically at the trunk, his back turned to the man who was about to kill him. Atlas was working. He trusted his handler to watch his back. He trusted the pack to keep him safe while he did the job. No, Jack screamed the word tearing from his throat, raw and bloody. He didn't think. There was no time to plan, no time to weigh the consequences. There was only the dog and the gun and the distance between them. Jack Reynolds, 55 years old, beaten, broken and chained, did the only thing he could do. He became a weapon. He launched himself from his crouch, exploding upward with a power he didn't know he still possessed. The leg iron snapped taut, biting into his shins, but he ignored the pain, forcing his legs to pump, forcing his body forward. He couldn't run, not really. The chains restricted his stride to a hobble, so he threw himself. He dove. It was a tackle born of desperation, a sprawling, headlong lunge through the mud. He wasn't aiming for the gun, he was aiming for the man. Carter was focused on the dog, lining up his sights, his finger tightening on the trigger. He didn't see the orange-clad missile flying at him from the periphery until it was too late. Jack hit him. He slammed into Carter's midsection with his shoulder, putting every ounce of his weight and his rage into the impact. The air left Carter's lungs in a sudden, explosive whoosh. The force of the collision lifted the lieutenant off his feet. They went down together, a tangle of limbs and shouting, landing hard on the wet, unforgiving asphalt. The impact jarred Jack's teeth, rattling his skull, but he didn't let go. He wrapped his cuffed arms around Carter's waist, pinning his arms to his sides. The gun went off. Bang! The shot was deafening at close range. The bullet went wide, slamming into the pavement, inches from Atlas's rear paw, sending a spray of concrete chips flying. The dog yelped, startled, jumping down from the trunk and spinning around, his hackles, raised teeth bared, ready to fight the new threat. Carter struggled beneath Jack, thrashing wildy panic, giving him a frantic strength. He tried to bring the gun around, trying to aim it at Jack's head, trying to aim it at the dog anywhere. "Get off me!" Carter screamed, spitting rain and saliva. "Get off me, you convict!" Jack headbutted him. He slammed his forehead into Carter's nose, feeling cartilage crunch. It was a dirty move, a street fight move, and it was satisfying. Carter cried out, eyes watering, his grip on the gun loosening for a fraction of a second. "Drop it!" Jack roared, pinning Carter's gun hand to the ground with his knee. "Drop the gun, Greg!" Lynn Gack were shouting now, running toward them. Batons drawn, confused about who to strike. The prisoner was attacking the officer. The hierarchy was clear, but the moral lines had blurred so completely that they hesitated. Freeze. The command came from above them, sharp and authoritative. It wasn't a suggestion. Sarah Jenkins stood over the tangle of men. She had drawn her weapon. She held it in a two-handed weaver stance, steady as a rock, the barrel pointed directly at Lieutenant Carter's head. "Drop the weapon, Lieutenant," she ordered, her voice cold and deadly calm. "Do it now." Carter froze. He looked up at the barrel of the gun. He looked at the woman holding it. He saw no hesitation in her eyes. He saw only the icy calculation of a hunter who has finally cornered her prey. "He is attacking me," Carter gasped, trying to twist away from Jack's weight. "He assaulted an officer. Shoot him, Sarah. Shoot the dog. I said drop it." Sarah repeated, stepping closer until the muzzle of her gun was inches from Carter's face. "You just discharged a firearm in the direction of a working canine officer and a restrained prisoner without cause. That is attempted murder, Greg. Drop it, or I will drop you." Carter's hand went limp. The gun clattered to the asphalt. Sarah kicked it away, sending it spinning across the wet parking lot under a patrol car. "Get up," she told Jack. Jack rolled off Carter, breathing hard, his chest heaving. He pushed himself to his knees, mud dripping from his uniform. He looked at Atlas. The dog was fine. He was standing by the bumper of the Corvette, vibrating with energy, his eyes darting between the fight and the trunk. He let out a sharp bark as if to say, "Are we done playing?" "The box is still in here." Carter scrambled backward, crab, walking away from Jack, clutching his bleeding nose. "You are dead, Reynolds!" he hissed, his voice thick with blood. "You are dead! I will have you buried under the prison for this. And you, Jenkins, you are finished. Assaulting a superior officer." "Shut up," Sarah said. She didn't holster her weapon. She kept it at the low ready, her eyes fixed on Carter. "You are done giving orders, Lieutenant." She looked at the car. She looked at the scratches, the dents, the ruined paint. And then she looked at the dog who had returned to the trunk, scratching at the lock with renewed determination. He really wants in there, does not he? Sarah murmured. Jack nodded, wiping blood from his forehead where he had headbutted Carter. It is in there, the collar, and everything else. Carter's eyes widened. He scrambled to his feet, swaying slightly. You are crazy. There is nothing in there but trash. You are letting a dog destroy government property based on the word of a felon. Then open it, Sarah said, turning to face him. If it is just trash, open it. Prove him wrong. Prove the dog wrong. Carter hesitated. He looked at the trunk. He looked at the guards who were now watching him with suspicion. He looked at Jack. I lost my keys. Carter lied, his eyes darting around the lot. I dropped them when this maniac tackled me. Atlas barked again. He paused his scratching and trotted over to where Carter had fallen. He sniffed the ground once, then dipped his head. When he came up, he had something in his mouth. The keys. He trotted back to the car and dropped the keys on the trunk lid with a metallic clatter. He looked at Jack, wagging his tail. Jack couldn't help it. He laughed, a short, ragged sound of disbelief and triumph. I think he found them for you, Greg, Jack said. Sarah walked over to the car. She picked up the keys. She held them up, the wet metal glinting in the floodlights. She looked at the leather fob, the piece of the old leash that Carter had kept as a trophy. Allow me, she said. No, Carter shouted, lunging forward. Sarah raised her gun again, aiming at center mass. Stay back. Carter stopped, chest-heaving hands clenching and unclenching. He was trapped. He was watching his life unravel in real time. Sarah turned to the trunk. She found the right key. She inserted it into the lock. Atlas stepped back, giving her room, sitting down and staring at the lid, his tail sweeping back and forth across the scratched paint. He was ready. He had done the work. Now he wanted his reward. Sarah turned the key. The mechanism clicked. With a hiss of hydraulic struts, the trunk lid began to rise. The trunk lid rose with a slow mechanical hiss, revealing the interior of the Corvette under the harsh glare of the parking lot floodlights. For a moment there was only silence, a heavy, suffocating pause, where the only sound was the rain drumming against the open cavity of the vehicle. Every eye in the lot was fixed on that small, carpeted space. The guards, Sarah, Jack, and a terrified Lieutenant Carter all leaned in, waiting for the smoking gun. But at first glance there was nothing. The trunk was a mess of mundane clutter, the careless storage of a man who treated his luxury car like a locker room. There was a duffel bag stuffed with gym clothes, a pair of expensive tennis rackets carelessly thrown on top of a quart of motor oil, and a folded sunshade. There were no stacks of money. There were no drugs. There were no dead bodies. It looked exactly like what Carter had claimed it was, a trunk full of junk. Carter let out a breath, a sound that was half laugh and half sob. He took a step forward, his confidence surging back like a tidal wave crashing over his fear. See, he shouted, pointing a shaking finger at the open trunk. See, I told you. There is nothing there. It is just my gym gear. You let a crazy dog tear apart a $100,000 car for a pair of dirty sneakers. He turned to Sarah, his face twisting into a sneer of triumph. You are finished, Jenkins. This is harassment. This is destruction of property. I am going to have your badge for this, and Reynolds is going straight to solitary. Jack felt a cold stone settle in his stomach. He stared at the trunk, his eyes frantically scanning the debris. He didn't see the box. He didn't see the collar. Had he been wrong? Had Carter thrown it away months ago? Had the scent Atlas tracked just been a ghost? A lingering residue of something that was long gone? Atlas, he whispered, his voice breaking. But Atlas wasn't looking at Jack. He wasn't looking at Carter. And he certainly didn't look defeated. The dog was standing by the bumper, his ears pricked forward, his body vibrating with a frequency that blurred his outline in the rain. He let out a low, impatient whine. He looked at the trunk, then he looked at Sarah, who was blocking his path. Move, Sarah, Jack said softly. Let him in. Sarah hesitated. She looked at the innocent pile of sports gear. She looked at the smug lieutenant. She looked at the dog. She holstered her weapon but kept her hand on the grip. She stepped aside. Atlas didn't wait for a second invitation. He didn't sniff the bumper. He didn't hesitate. He launched himself into the trunk of the Corvette. He landed on top of the tennis rackets, his paws crushing the strings. He shoved his snout deep into the corner of the trunk, ignoring the gym bag, ignoring the expensive equipment. He began to dig. What is he doing? Get him out of there, Carter shrieked, moving to grab the dog's tail. Stay back! Sarah barked, shoving Carter away with a one-handed strike to the chest. Atlas was in a frenzy. He bit the handle of the gym bag and tossed it out of the car. It landed with a wet thud on the asphalt, spilling sweaty clothes into the mud. He pawed at the carpet liner, ripping it back with his claws. He was digging for something buried deep, something hidden beneath the layers of casual debris. He whined louder, a sound of frustration and proximity. He bit down on something in the far recess of the trunk, something wedged tight behind the wheel well. He pulled. He growled, shaking his head violently, and then with a sound of tearing cardboard, he dragged it out. It was a box, an old oil-stained cardboard box, the kind that cheap tools came in. It was crushed on one side, damp from the humidity and utterly unremarkable. It looked like trash. It was the box Jack had kicked the collar into 6 months ago. The box Carter had scooped up and thrown in his trunk because he was too lazy to sort through it. Atlas backed out of the trunk, dragging the box with him. He jumped down to the pavement, the box clamped firmly in his jaws. He didn't drop it. He didn't offer it to Jack. He destroyed it. He pinned the box to the ground with his front paws and tore the lid off. He ripped the cardboard to shreds, spitting out pieces of wet paper. He was frantic, searching, sifting through the contents. Old screwdrivers rolled away, a rusty wrench clattered on the concrete, a roll of electrical tape spun into a puddle. Carter watched his face draining of color again. He recognized the box. He remembered the day of the raid, the confusion, the adrenaline, the feeling of absolute power as he watched Jack being hauled away. He remembered grabbing the junk from the driveway just to clear the scene. He hadn't looked inside. He hadn't cared. Atlas gave one final violent shake of his head, tearing the bottom of the box apart. And there it was. Falling out of the ruined cardboard landing with a heavy wet slap on the asphalt was a coiled strip of leather. It was wide, thick, and black. It had a heavy brass buckle and a sturdy V-ring for a tactical lead. It was worn at the edges, the leather softened by years of sweat and oil. It was a working dog's collar. Jack gasped. The air left his lungs as if he had been punched. He fell to his knees in the mud, reaching out with his cuffed hands. Atlas stopped tearing at the box. He looked at the collar lying in the rain. He lowered his nose and sniffed it gently, his tail giving a slow, rhythmic wag. He looked up at Jack, his eyes soft and proud. He nudged the collar toward Jack's knees. Here he seemed to say, "I found it. I brought it back." The silence in the parking lot was absolute. Even the rain seemed to hold its breath. Sarah Jenkins stared at the collar. She recognized it. She had seen photos of Atlas wearing it in the commendation files. It was the collar he had worn the night of the raid, the collar that was listed as missing in the official evidence log. Jack Reynolds reached out. His hands were shaking so badly the chains on his wrists rattled like wind chimes. He picked up the collar. It was cold and wet and heavy. It smelled of mildew and old leather, but underneath that, it smelled of Atlas. He ran his thumb over the brass nameplate. Atlas. K-9 unit. "Why do you have this?" Lieutenant Sarah asked, her voice quiet and dangerous. "Why do you have the missing personal effects of a police K-9 in your trunk?" Carter was stammering, backing away, his hands raised in a pathetic gesture of surrender. "I did not know it was there. It was just junk. I picked it up by accident. It does not mean anything. It is just an old dog collar. So what? That does not prove anything." Jack didn't look at him. He didn't look at Sarah. He was focused entirely on the collar in his hands. He turned it over. He found the spot near the buckle where the leather was doubled over and stitched with heavy nylon thread. It was a hidden compartment designed to hold a spare handcuff key or a GPS tracker chip. Jack's fingernail dug into the seam. The leather was stiff from the cold and the age. He gritted his teeth, praying, "Please let it be there. Please let it be safe." He pushed harder, tearing at the stitching. The thread snapped. Jack pried the layers of leather apart. A tiny black square fell out. It was a micro SD card no bigger than a fingernail. It landed in the palm of Jack's hand, glinting in the floodlight like a dark jewel. Jack stared at it. He closed his fingers around it tight, terrified that the wind might blow it away. He looked up at Sarah. Tears were streaming down his face, mixing with the rain and the blood from his forehead. "This," Jack said, his voice cracking. "This proves everything." Sarah looked at the card. She understood instantly. "What is on that card?" Carter whispered, his voice barely audible. Jack looked at him. The fear in Carter's eyes was total. He looked like a man who was watching his own execution. Your voice, Jack said. It has your voice, Greg. It has you talking to the cartel. It has you bragging about the setup. It has everything. I recorded it all, and I hid it right under your nose. Carter's knees gave out. He slumped against the side of his ruined car, sliding down until he was sitting in the mud. He didn't try to run. He didn't try to fight. He just stared at the tiny piece of plastic in Jack's hand, realizing that his empire of lies had been toppled by a piece of leather and a dog's nose. Sarah walked over to Jack. She didn't ask for permission. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a key. She unlocked Jack's handcuffs. The steel bracelets fell away, clattering to the ground. Jack rubbed his wrists. He stood up slowly. He walked over to Atlas, who was sitting patiently by the pile of shredded cardboard. Jack knelt down and wrapped his arms around the dog's neck, burying his face in the wet fur. Good boy, Jack whispered. You are the best boy. Atlas licked the blood off Jack's forehead. He didn't know about the SD card. He didn't know about the corruption or the prison sentence. He just knew that he had found the lost item. He had completed the mission, and his pack was back together. Sarah turned to the guards who were standing around looking confused and useless. Secure the lieutenant, she ordered, pointing at Carter. Read him his rights, and get a tech out here with a playback unit. Now. She looked at Jack and the dog huddled together in the rain. She smiled a small, tight smile of satisfaction. You were right, Reynolds, she said softly. He is not just a dog. He is the best detective on the force. The rain continued to fall, but for the first time in 6 months it felt clean. It felt like it was washing away the dirt and the lies, leaving only the truth standing tall in the center of the storm. Jack held the collar in one hand and his dog in the other, and he knew that he had finally won. Not because of the law, not because of the system, but because of loyalty. Pure, unbreakable loyalty. Sarah Jenkins did not say a word. She treated the tiny piece of plastic in her hand with the reverence usually reserved for a holy relic or a loaded weapon. The rain continued to drum against the shoulders of her trench coat, but she seemed impervious to the elements, her entire being focused on the forensic preservation of the truth. She reached into the deep pocket of her coat and withdrew a ruggedized field tablet, the kind used by tactical units for on-site surveillance reviews. Her movements were deliberate, almost surgically precise. She wiped the rain from the screen with her sleeve. She produced a small card reader adapter from her kit, connecting it to the port on the side of the device. Jack watched her, his chest heaving with the after effects of the fight and the adrenaline crash. He was covered in mud, his uniform torn, his forehead bleeding freely where he had struck Carter, but he felt a strange lightness, a buoyancy that he hadn't felt since the day he was arrested. He looked at Atlas. The dog was sitting beside him, leaning against his leg, offering physical support. Atlas wasn't looking at the tablet. He was looking at Carter. His ears pinned back, his lip curled slightly in a silent snarl. The dog knew. He didn't need a recording to know who the enemy was. Carter stood 10 feet away, swaying slightly like a tree about to fall. His face was the color of old ash. He stared at the tablet in Sarah's hands with a mixture of horror and disbelief. He wanted to run. Jack could see the impulse twitching in the lieutenant's legs, the desire to bolt toward the gate to disappear into the city. But Carter knew it was futile. There were guards everywhere. There was Sarah. And there was the dog. If he ran, Atlas would catch him before he made it 10 yards. Sarah inserted the microSD card. The screen of the tablet flared to life, illuminating her face in a ghostly blue glow. Her fingers danced across the touchscreen, bypassing the encryption prompts mounting the drive. Audio files found, she announced, her voice cutting through the quiet hum of the rain. Date stamp matches the night of the harbor raid. Timestamp is 2300 hours, 30 minutes after Officer Reynolds was taken into custody. She turned the volume up to maximum. She held the tablet up like a shield, facing it toward the group so everyone, the guards, the handlers, Carter, and Jack, could hear. She pressed play. For a second, there was only the hiss of static, the digital noise of rain and wind, recorded through a layer of thick leather. Then came a sound that made every hair on Jack's arm stand up. A bark. It was Atlas. Muffled, distant, coming from inside a vehicle, but unmistakable. It was the sound of a dog locked in a cage, furious and helpless. Then a car door slammed in the recording. Footsteps crunched on gravel, heavy and close. "Shut that damn dog up," a voice growled from the speaker. The guards in the parking lot shifted their feet, exchanging nervous glances. They knew that voice. It was the voice that gave them orders every morning. It was Lieutenant Carter. He is locked in the K-9 unit, Greg. Another voice answered, a deeper, rougher voice with a heavy accent. He cannot hear us. Nobody can hear us. The perimeter is clear. Jack closed his eyes. He recognized that voice too. It was Vargas, the cartel lieutenant they were supposed to be hunting, the man who had escaped the raid, the man Carter claimed had vanished into thin air, Good Carter's recorded voice said. The audio was crisp now, the microphone in the collar picking up the frequencies perfectly. Reynolds is gone. I sent him to central processing in the wagon. He is done. And the money, Vargas asked. It is secured, Carter replied. I moved $2 million to the evidence van to make the bust look legit. The other $3 million is in the trunk of my squad car. We split it 50-50 just like we agreed. A gasp rippled through the parking lot. One of the rookie guards whispered, Jesus Christ, his hand flying to his mouth. Carter let out a strangled sound, a whimpering protest that was drowned out by his own voice coming from the machine. What about the cop? Vargas asked on the tape. He saw you. He saw you take the brick. Do not worry about Jack Carter's voice was dripping with arrogance, a sonic fingerprint of his own narcissism. I planted 50 grand in his garage toolbox about an hour ago. My guys are raiding his house tomorrow morning. By noon, he will be a dirty cop who stole from a crime scene. Nobody will believe a word he says. He is a dinosaur. I am the future. You are cold. Greg Vargas laughed a dry, rasping sound. I like that. Business is business, Carter said. Now get out of here before the feds show up. And Vargas, do not spend it all in one place. The recording ended with the sound of an engine starting and tires peeling away on wet pavement. Sarah pressed stop. The silence that followed was absolute. It was heavier than the rain, heavier than the night. It was the silence of a world shifting on its axis. The truth, which had been buried under layers of lies and paperwork and corruption, had been dragged out into the light by a piece of plastic no bigger than a fingernail. Jack opened his eyes. He looked at Carter. The lieutenant was no longer standing. He had collapsed. His legs had simply given out under the weight of the evidence. He was on his knees in the mud. His expensive suit ruined, his hands hanging limp at his sides. He stared at the ground, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on a hook. But no sound came out. There was no defense. There was no spin. There was no way to talk his way out of his own voice detailing the crime. Sarah lowered the tablet. She looked at Carter with an expression of profound disgust. It wasn't anger anymore. It was the look one gives to something scraped off the bottom of a boot. Section 402, she said. Her voice quiet but carrying like a bell. Conspiracy to commit grand larceny, obstruction of justice, filing false reports, evidence tampering, and framing a police officer. She walked over to Carter. He didn't look up. He didn't move. He was broken. Get up, Greg Sarah ordered. Carter didn't move. He began to shake. A low sobbing sound escaped his throat, a pathetic noise that contrasted sharply with the bravado he had shown just minutes ago. It was just money, he whispered to the asphalt. It was just money. He was old. He was going to retire anyway. I deserved it. I did all the work. Jack walked over. He moved slowly, his joints aching from the cold and the chains, but he stood tall. He stopped in front of Carter. He looked down at the man who had stolen 6 months of his life, who had tried to kill his dog. It was not just money, Jack said softly. It was my life. It was his life. He pointed at Atlas. The dog was standing beside Jack, watching Carter with a steady, unblinking gaze. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He just watched. Justice for a dog wasn't about words. It was about balance. The threat was neutralized. The pack was safe. Jack looked at the guards. They were staring at Carter with a mix of shock and betrayal. These were men who wore the same uniform, who believed in the code. To hear their commander selling out one of their own to a cartel boss was a violation that cut deeper than any physical wound. Get him out of my sight, Jack said. The guards moved. The hesitation was gone. They grabbed Carter by the arms, hauling him up with a roughness that bordered on violence. They didn't treat him like a lieutenant anymore. They treated him like a perp. Wait, Carter stammered as they dragged him toward the transport van, the same van that was meant for Jack. Wait, I can cut a deal. I have names. I have information. Save it. Sarah said, turning her back on him. They threw Carter into the back of the van. The heavy metal doors slammed shut with a finality that echoed through the lot. The sound was the closing of a chapter, the end of a nightmare. Sarah turned to Jack. She held out her hand. In her palm lay a small silver key. Jack looked at it. It was the key to the handcuffs. "Turn around," Sarah said gently. Jack turned. He felt the cold metal mechanism click. The cuffs sprang open. They fell from his wrists, clattering to the ground, landing in the mud next to the muzzle. Jack rubbed his wrists, feeling the blood flow returning to his fingers. He took a deep breath, inhaling the clean, wet air. He was free. He looked at Sarah. "Thank you." "Do not thank me," Sarah said, a small smile touching her lips. "Thank your lawyer." She nodded toward Atlas. Jack knelt down. He didn't care about the mud. He didn't care about the rain. He wrapped his arms around the massive neck of the German shepherd, pulling him into a hug that was fierce and desperate and full of love. "You did it," Jack whispered into the thick fur. "You did it, buddy. You saved me." Atlas licked the tears from Jack's face, his tail thumping a steady rhythm against the pavement. He let out a soft, happy whine. He didn't know about the money. He didn't know about the law. He only knew one thing. He had found the lost thing, and now they were going home. The recording ended, leaving a silence in the parking lot that was heavier than the storm itself. The digital ghost of Greg Carter's voice faded, but the reality of his crimes hung in the air, suffocating and undeniable. Sarah lowered the tablet, her face set in a mask of grim satisfaction. She didn't need to say another word. The evidence had spoken for her. She looked at the guards who were standing frozen, their eyes wide with the shock of betrayal. They were looking at their commanding officer not with respect, but with the dawning realization that they had been pawns in a dirty game. "Take him into custody," Sarah ordered, her voice cutting through the rain like a whip crack. The hesitation that had paralyzed the guards earlier vanished instantly. They were professionals, and they knew exactly what to do with a criminal. They moved as one, a synchronized wall of blue uniforms closing in on the man in the ruined suit. Carter stumbled back, his heels slipping on the wet asphalt. He held his hands up, palms out, in a pathetic gesture of defense, as if he could ward off the inevitable with a wave. "Wait," he stammered, his voice pitching up into a desperate whine. "You do not understand. We can work this out. I have names. I know where the rest of the money is. I can give you the cartel. Just listen to me." "Do not listen to him," Jack said quietly. The guards didn't listen. One of them grabbed Carter's arm, twisting it behind his back with a force that made the lieutenant yelp. The other kicked Carter's legs apart, forcing him to bend over the hood of his own scratched and battered Corvette. The car he had bought with blood money was now the altar of his arrest. "You have the right to remain silent," Sarah recited, walking toward him. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Carter writhed against the hold, struggling uselessly. "This is a mistake. You are making a huge mistake. I am a lieutenant. You cannot do this to me." "I just did," Sarah said. She reached for the handcuffs on her own belt. She didn't let the guards do it. She wanted to do it herself. She wanted to feel the steel lock around the wrists of the man who had disgraced the badge she wore. She pulled Carter's other arm back, wrenching his shoulder. Click, click. The sound of the ratchets tightening was sharp, mechanical, and infinitely satisfying. It was the sound of justice engaging. It was the sound of a trap snapping shut on the predator instead of the prey. Carter slumped against the car, the fight draining out of him as the cold reality of the steel bit into his skin. He looked over his shoulder, his eyes searching the lot for an ally, for a way out. But there was no one. Just the rain. Just the guards who despised him. And Jack. Jack stood 10 feet away watching. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He didn't scream or curse or spit on the man who had tried to destroy his life. He simply watched with a calm, detached gaze. He saw a man who had traded his honor for cash and was now realizing the exchange rate was terrible. "Get him out of here," Sarah said, turning her back on Carter. The guards hauled Carter up. They didn't use the gentle grip they had used on Jack. They grabbed him by the collar and the belt, marching him toward the transport van. The same van that had been waiting for Jack. The same dark steel cage that was supposed to be Jack's tomb. Carter's feet dragged through the puddles, ruining his Italian leather shoes. He was sobbing now, a broken weeping sound that was lost in the wind. As they threw him into the back of the van and slammed the heavy doors shut, The sound echoed like a gunshot ending the war. Silence returned to the lot. A clean, heavy silence. Sarah turned to Jack. She walked over to him, her steps slow and respectful. She stopped in front of him and looked down at his wrists, still bound by the heavy iron cuffs. "I think these belong to him now," she said softly. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small silver key. She took Jack's hands in hers. Her grip was warm, firm. She inserted the key into the lock on the left wrist. Click! The cuff sprang open, falling away from his skin. Jack rubbed his wrist, feeling the blood rush back, feeling the bruise where the metal had dug in for hours. She unlocked the right one. Click! The handcuffs clattered to the wet pavement, landing in the mud next to the muzzle and the shredded cardboard box. They lay there, artifacts of a nightmare that was finally over. Jack took a deep breath. He inhaled the scent of rain and ozone and freedom. He rolled his shoulders, feeling the weight of the last 6 months lift off him like a heavy coat. He was a free man. His name was cleared. The bad guy was in chains. He looked at Sarah. "Thank you." "Do not thank me," Sarah said, shaking her head, a small smile touching her lips. "Thank your partner." She nodded toward the ground. Jack looked down. Atlas was sitting by his feet. The great black and sable dog was soaked to the bone, his fur spiked with water, his ribs heaving with exertion. But his eyes were bright, his ears were perked, his tail was sweeping back and forth across the wet asphalt in a slow, rhythmic beat. He wasn't a weapon anymore. He wasn't a piece of evidence. He was just a dog who had found his person. Jack's knees gave out. He didn't fall, he sank. He dropped to the ground, ignoring the mud, ignoring the cold, ignoring the dignity of his rank. He knelt in front of the dog and opened his arms. Atlas didn't hesitate. He lunged forward, burying his massive head into Jack's chest. He let out a low, happy whine that vibrated through Jack's ribs. He licked Jack's face, washing away the rain and the tears and the blood with rough, wet strokes. Jack wrapped his arms around the dog's neck, burying his face in the thick, wet fur. He held on tight, tighter than he had ever held anything in his life. He felt the dog's warmth. He felt the steady, strong beat of his heart. "You did it," Jack whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. "You did it, buddy. You saved me." Atlas barked a soft, playful woof and nudged Jack's chin with his nose. He didn't know about the corruption. He didn't know about the prison sentence. He didn't know about the law. He only knew that the pack was back together. The Alpha was safe, and the lost thing had been found. Jack closed his eyes, letting the dog lick his face, letting the rain wash over them. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't Officer Reynolds. He wasn't Inmate 402. He was just Jack. And he was home. The gray concrete of the courthouse parking lot faded into memory, replaced by the golden, shimmering expanse of a mountain lake, reflecting the deep blue of a clear autumn sky. 3 months had passed since the storm that nearly destroyed 2 lives, but looking at the man standing on the edge of the water, you would hardly recognize him as the prisoner who had knelt in the mud. Jack Reynolds stood on the grassy bank of his new property, a modest wooden cabin tucked away in the pines far from the noise of the precinct and the politics of the city. He wasn't wearing a uniform. The badge, the gun, and the handcuffs were gone, replaced by worn blue jeans and a soft flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up. He looked 8 years younger. The deep lines of stress that had etched his face during the trial had softened, smoothed out by fresh air, and the kind of sleep that only comes to a free man. He held a bright yellow tennis ball in his hand, squeezing it, testing the bounce. He pulled his arm back and threw it hard, sending it arcing high over the water. "Get it!" Jack called out, his voice clear and happy. A splash of water answered him. Atlas hit the lake like a torpedo. The German Shepherd was transformed. The ribs that had jutted out so painfully were gone, hidden beneath a thick, glossy coat of black and sable fur that shone without health. The red-rimmed eyes of the kennel were clear and bright, focused entirely on the bouncing ball. He swam with powerful strokes, his ears flattened against his head, snatching the toy from the surface with a playful snap of his jaws. He turned, paddling back to the shore with a grace that belied his size. He shook himself violently as he emerged, sending a spray of lake water over Jack. "Hey, watch it!" Jack laughed, shielding his face. Atlas dropped the ball at Jack's feet and barked. It wasn't an alert bark. It wasn't a threat. It was a demand for play, a joyful, carefree sound that echoed off the trees. Jack picked up the ball. He looked at the dog. It was hard to believe that just 90 days ago this animal had been scheduled for execution, deemed a broken weapon too dangerous to live. Now he was just a dog who loved the water, a dog who loved his human. They played until the sun began to dip behind the mountains, painting the sky in streaks of purple and orange. The air grew crisp, carrying the scent of wood smoke and pine needles. Jack whistled a short, sharp note, and Atlas trotted to his side, instantly obedient but relaxed. "Let's go inside, buddy," Jack said. They walked up the path to the cabin. Inside, a fire was already crackling in the stone hearth, casting a warm glow over the comfortable furniture. There were no cages here. There were no chains. Jack sank into a large leather armchair with a sigh of contentment. He picked up a mug of coffee from the side table, warming his hands. On the wall opposite him hung a framed newspaper clipping. The headline was bold and black: "Police corruption ring smashed. Lieutenant sentenced to 20 years." Jack looked at it for a moment, then looked away. He didn't need the reminder. The justice system had finally done its job, but only because a dog had forced it to. He had received a full pardon, a reinstatement of his pension, and a settlement that had bought this quiet slice of paradise. But none of that mattered as much as what was happening right now. Atlas walked over to the chair. He circled once, then flopped down heavily on the rug. He rested his heavy head on Jack's feet, letting out a long, deep sigh of relaxation. His eyes drifted shut. Jack reached down, running his hand over the dog's head. He felt the thick fur, the solid bone, the steady rhythm of the dog's breathing. He traced the line of the new collar around Atlas's neck. It was soft leather, simple and unadorned. No tactical hardware, no hidden microphones, just a tag that read Atlas. The dog twitched in his sleep, chasing rabbits in his dreams. Jack smiled, leaning his head back against the chair. The silence of the cabin wasn't lonely. It was peaceful. It was the silence of a promise kept. They had walked through the fire together. They had faced the barrel of a gun and the gavel of a judge. They had lost everything and found it all again in the trunk of a silver car. Jack closed his eyes, listening to the fire and the breathing of his best friend. He knew he would never wear the badge again, but he didn't care. He had the only partner he would ever need. People say that a dog is man's best friend, a companion for the lonely days, and a guardian for the dark nights. But for Jack Reynolds, looking down at the sleeping shepherd, who had defied an entire police force to save him the truth, was something far deeper. Atlas wasn't just a friend. He wasn't just a pet. He was the only witness who mattered. He was the nose that smelled the truth when everyone else was blind. He was justice wrapped in loyalty. And in the end, he was the only reason Jack was breathing the free air of the mountains instead of the stale air of a cell. Sometimes the hero doesn't carry a shield. Sometimes he just carries a ball. And sometimes the savior doesn't speak a word, he just refuses to let go. The story of Officer Jack Reynolds and Canine Atlas teaches us a profound lesson about the nature of loyalty and the unstoppable power of truth. In a world often clouded by corruption, greed, and betrayal, where even the justice system can be manipulated by those in power, there remains one bond that cannot be bought or broken: the connection between a human and a dog. Atlas didn't understand the complexities of the law or the weight of the evidence planted against his handler. He simply knew the truth of his own instincts. This story reminds us that true integrity doesn't need words to make itself known. While humans may lie to protect themselves, a dog's loyalty is absolute and transparent. Jack's salvation didn't come from a courtroom or a high-priced lawyer. It came from a creature that refused to give up on him when the rest of the world turned its back. It serves as a powerful reminder that sometimes the greatest heroes don't wear uniforms or carry badges. They walk on four legs, guided by a heart that knows only love and duty. It challenges us to cherish and protect those silent guardians who stand by us in our darkest hours. If you believe that a dog's loyalty is the purest form of love, hit that like button, share this story with a friend who needs hope, and subscribe for more tales of incredible canine heroes.